said rise when I gave the word. Now in the morning I sleep alone. Sweep the streets I used to own. I used to roll the dice, feel the fear in my enemy's eyes. Listen as the crowd would sing. Now the old king's dead, long live the king. 1 minute I held the key. Next the walls were closed on me, and I discovered that my castle stand upon pillars of salt and pillars of sand.
Who's friends with all the night dreamers talking to you at night? Gary on the radio, but maybe he's not in sight. Bigfoot's on his tail, flying UFOs, that's right. Gary's talk show radio, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday nights. If you need a friend to talk to, he will always be there. The Night Dreamers talk show will fix your despair. If you want to talk conspiracies, Night Dreamers is for you. Top secret case, alien space, it's Gary with the news. Tune in on the radio, don't let Big Brother know. They're listening to everything, even Gary's late night show. If you need a friend to talk to, he will always be there. The Night Show Dreamers talk show will fix your despair, because Gary's talking to you at night.
What I enjoy doing a show like this is we can all explore the strange, the unexplained, one dream at a time together as a night dreamer. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Now, the latest news from the Night Dreams Talk Radio Network Newsroom. I'm Guy Ticker. How much does Earth weigh? Scientists have spent centuries determining Earth's mass, which is its resistance to movement against an applied force. According to NASA, Earth's mass is 5.9722 times 1,024 kilograms, or around 13.1 septillion pounds. That's quite a bit. It equates to around 13 quadrillion of Egypt's pyramid Khafre, which itself weighs around 10 billion pounds, 4.8 billion kilograms. The Earth's mass fluctuates slightly due to the addition of space dust and gases leaking out of our atmosphere, but these tiny changes won't affect Earth for billions of years. So, don't worry. I'm Guy Ticker. The news is brought to you by Night Dreams Talk Radio Network. To submit a story or to get all the latest news, go to nightdreamstalkradio.com. The truth is out there. You are listening to Night Dreams Talk Radio Network, the home of Night Dreams Talk Radio, with Gary Anderson, syndicated worldwide. Paranormal Talk Radio, like you remember.
It is now September the 9th. Boy, time is going by so fast. I want to thank everybody out there that listens to the show. Without you, we wouldn't be doing this. Tonight is a very special show. I'm going to be talking about my late friend Art Bell with some of his other friends like Major Ed Dames, Whitley Strieber, Jim Goodall, and Stan Gordon, which really loved and probably never missed any of the Art Bell shows. Tonight, we're going to get deep into Art Bell with some stories, and then we're going to find out what Major Ed Dames is up to, along with everybody else. But, you know, if you think about radio shows, talk radio shows, you know, there was Larry King, and then there was a show called Herb Jeffco in the 60s, where people would just call up and talk. You know, there's a lot of lonely people, and that's how talk radio has always been around, but it really involved. And here was Art Bell playing and spinning records and doing talk radio. Later on, even doing talk radio in Las Vegas, he was very unhappy talking about politics every night in world events. And a friend of his, John Lear, approached Art Bell down at the station. And they went into the room and they had a conversation. And John Lear said, Art, have you thought about talking about UFOs? Art Bell reportedly was laughing about it and gave it some thought. He goes, I'm going to try it on my next show. And he did. He got on there and he talked about UFOs and strangeness. And the radio station didn't even know what he was planning to do. And all of a sudden they were getting massive phone calls. The program director, the station manager, they were all freaking out and mad. And at one point they were thinking they were even going to get rid of Art Bell for what he pulled. But all these phone calls were positive. Everybody loved hearing about UFOs and not hearing about politics. That is one of the things about Art Bell qualities. If it wasn't for that, if it wasn't for John Lear and Art Bell getting together and Art Bell doing that, alternative radio, talking about UFOs and all these other podcasts and radio shows might not even exist. Talking about that, could you imagine we could be talking about camping or, well, how is your garden growing? It's totally different than what it is today. And, Art Bell was a forerunner in alternative talk radio. And again, without him, we wouldn't be where we're at today. I was retired in broadcasting, which I did talk about UFOs. I did all that for the years, but, I never got the fame that Art Bell did. And here I was retired, and Art calls me out of the blue. He goes, you need to get back into radio and get rid of your Harley motorcycles before you kill yourself. I listened to him. Boy, did I listen to him. The internet, I didn't know anything really about internet radio. And what I did listen to it, I thought it was kind of, what. But I started a show called Motorcycle Talk. I think in a month's time, I had 15 listeners, if I was lucky. Art calls me up, laughing, and he said, did you learn your lesson? Lesson of what? He goes, you don't have anybody listening to you, do you? Why are you talking about motorcycles? I don't know. What did you do all these years? Yeah. Well, that's how my show evolved. Going away from motorcycles to talking to the strangeness. As Art Bell would say, the strange and the wacky. Well, tonight we're going to be talking a lot about Art Bell. And we're going to be talking, again about remote viewing, alien abduction, UFOs, all that here tonight. So I hope you stay tuned. We're going to be right back right after this.
Take a journey of adventure and discovery for the enigmatic giants of the forests. Read On the Trail of Bigfoot by Mike Dupler. The author himself describes it this way.
Having found possible Sasquatch evidence, namely trees driven into the ground upside down, thought to be territory markers, led me to investigate this creature in my native Ohio. Several years and many forays into Bigfoot territory, I have found incredible evidence, which inspired my book, On the Trail of Bigfoot. Bigfoot is alive and has many fantastic abilities. The evidence is out there for all to see, but you need to know what to look for. My book will inspire those who have answered the call to seek this elusive creature, the Bigfoot. The truth is out there.
Read On the Trail of Bigfoot by Mike Dupler. Available now at Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and IndieBound.org. Art Bell, the legendary voice of the paranormal. Art Bell, born Arthur William Bell III on June 17, 1945, in North Carolina, was a trailblazer in the world of talk radio. Known as the king of late-night radio, Art Bell captivated millions of listeners with his distinctive voice and unparalleled ability to explore the unknown. His groundbreaking show, Coast to Coast AM, became the go-to platform for discussions on the paranormal, UFOs, conspiracies, and everything that lay beyond the veil of conventional understanding. Art's career highlights include Coast to Coast AM. Founded by Art in 1988, this show became a cultural phenomenon, regularly drawing millions of listeners during its late-night time slot. Bell's unique interviewing style, coupled with his open-minded approach to all things mysterious, made the show a staple for anyone interested in the unexplained. Midnight in the Desert. After semi-retiring from Coast to Coast AM, Art Bell returned to radio in 2015 with Midnight in the Desert, another late-night show that maintained his tradition of exploring fringe topics. The show was broadcast online and quickly garnered a dedicated following. Publishing. Art Bell was also a published author, co-writing the book The Coming Global Superstorm with Whitley Strieber in 1999, which inspired the blockbuster movie The Day After Tomorrow. As for accomplishments and awards, in 2008, Art Bell was inducted into the National Radio Hall of Fame, a testament to his influence and enduring legacy in the world of radio. He was a satellite radio pioneer. Art Bell was one of the first radio personalities to embrace satellite radio, helping to bring his unique content to an even broader audience through channels like XM radio. Then there were his groundbreaking interviews. Throughout his career, Bell conducted interviews with some of the most intriguing figures in alternative topics, from scientists to experiencers to those who claimed first-hand knowledge of government conspiracies. His willingness to listen and probe deep into these stories set him apart from other broadcasters. Last, but certainly not least, there's Art Bell's legacy. Art Bell's influence on alternative talk radio is immeasurable. His ability to create an atmosphere of curiosity, open-mindedness, and respect for his guests and listeners alike made him a beloved figure in the world of broadcasting. His shows were not just about entertainment. They were about exploring the edges of human understanding. Art passed away on April 13th, 2018, but his legacy lives on. His work continues to inspire a new generation of broadcasters and truth seekers, and his shows are still enjoyed by fans around the world. A final thought. Art Bell was more than just a radio host. He was a friend and mentor and cultural icon who dared to venture into the unknown and brought millions along for the journey. His voice may be gone, but the echoes of his curiosity and his passion for the unexplained will never fade.
You're listening to my friend Gary Anderson on My Dreams Talk Radio, the best in paranormal radio.
Well, JC, are you ready to go for a ride, as Art would say?
I'm ready to go and looking forward to it. I got to tell you, it's going to be a big, big shoe.
Yeah, it is. Well, let's start off with a bio for our first guest.
The world's foremost remote viewing teacher, Edward A. Dames, Major, U.S. Army retired, is a decorated military intelligence officer and an original member of the U.S. Army prototype Remote Viewing Training Program. He served as the Training and Operations Officer for the Defense Intelligence Agency's Psychic Intelligence Collection Unit, and currently serves as Executive Director for the Matrix Intelligence Agency, a private consulting group. Major Ed Dames was the technical consultant for the feature film Suspect Zero, a Tom Cruise, Paula Wagner production. And as such, Ed coached Sir Ben Kingsley and played a role of an FBI remote viewing instructor in the movie as well. For more on Major Edward A. Dames, visit his website, remoteviewingmatrix.com.
Well, Ed, welcome to the show. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing pretty well. I was in France 3 times in back-to-back trips in April, and after I had pinpointed the body of a missing toddler, a 2-year-old child who had gone missing, the police couldn't find him, so I stepped in, found him. And the French people were so enthralled, they wanted me on television the whole month. So, but I'll be 75 years old on Sunday, and I got to tell you, no spring chicken, and those 3 flights and television shows and all that work, it took a toll on me. So I got really sick, but I'm okay now. I'm recovering.
Wow, that's a lot too. When you fly in an aircraft, you risk getting sick because they recycle that air, regardless how many filters they have. Okay. If somebody has COVID in that plane and they're coughing and whatever, everybody else is going to come down with it.
Yeah, there were a lot of sick kids on the second flight, and so I kind of knew what I was about to be faced with, that kind of thing. But if anybody's interested in the story on that kid, they can just Google CIA psychic spy, and all the news will pop up about my work on the child's case.
Very interesting. Again, in the news, they're talking about the sun is actually irradiated the belt around the Earth, which scientists are really concerned about that. And, I know you talked about the kill shot, but, predicting the time is really hard to do. But, a lot of things are happening. Scientists are now saying that within 50 years from now, we're probably going to go into ice age because the water going from the equator is going to totally stall. A lot of things are going on this Earth, but what do you see in the future with the sun?
Well, I think that in my estimates over the years of study, it appears that that there's a very large cycle, an 11,500 nominally 11,500 year cycle, and there's a number of epiphenomena, smaller cycles within that. For instance, the solar cycles that we're so used to, we're in solar cycle 25 now, as measured from when we started. And in 2002, I told Art that the sun's about to go on a rampage. And 2 weeks later, it produced what scientists feel was at least an X45 X-ray flare off the back of the sun. They had to create a whole new logarithmic band for these new mega flares. And NASA scientists later on, they didn't want to tell the public immediately, but they did come out and say they waited about almost 5 years to say if that had been Earth facing, then and I quote, this is NASA, mankind would find themselves back in the Stone Age, unquote. And Art asked me on the air, because I had talked about there's going to be a shot across the bow before all the series of what I call the kill shot. And scientists are now using my terminology before the cycle starts. And it's about to start. We'll discuss that momentarily. But you can imagine all the commo satellites going down, and power grids in the northern hemisphere, not all, but most, going down because transformers are blown out. So we're talking, we're looking at, and I talk about this in Prepping for the Kill Shot. You can download that on my website. I talk about all these things. 6 months to 2 years it will take to replace transformers throughout wherever the power goes down in North America. So that's no commo, no communications, no toilets flushing, and the rest. I detail point by point by point in the Prepping for the Kill Shot video. But now we're entering solar max of solar cycle 25. And Art had said his terminology was the quickening. My terminology was a confluence of events. We would parry each one of those terms with each other. And a confluence of events meaning a global economic collapse, which I predicted in the first couple of Coast to Coast shows that I was on. And this solar kill shot sequence. Here we are in solar cycle 25 at the beginning of perhaps a 2-year solar max. And folks, after you listen to me, this wild and wacky guy here, go look at the sun today and then cross your fingers.
Yeah, well, going in the closet or going under the bed isn't going to do any good, Ed. I can tell you that.
Well, it will against trolls. And just don't forget to whistle when you cross those bridges.
Yeah, it's scary when you think about it. And, again, talk about population control, according to the CIA, 90% of the population in the first year will be gone. Just if we lose all the grids. That's scary.
Well, we won't lose all the grids, I don't think, especially in the southern hemisphere. The effects as far as, and it's very difficult to study this, but the effects as far as we've actually seen using technical remote viewing appear to be primarily in the developed countries in the northern hemisphere. The southern hemisphere, for the most part, Africa and South America, and for the Amish, nothing will change. They won't even know what happened because they have no developed infrastructure to speak of. So, but us in the northern hemisphere, we depend upon all our communications for our banking, for everything now. So a Carrington level event these days and times will produce more than sparks and paper on fire in telegraph operators' offices. It'll take everything down. And
you mean you won't be able to go on TikTok or Facebook or go on and listen to my show?
No, unfortunately not. Unless you go ham radio, that might work after the disturbances and the perturbations in Earth's ionosphere reach equilibrium again. Then ham radios will work.
Oh, yeah. Now, again, you first appeared on Art's show on September 17th, 1996. What was it like being on Art's show?
Well, I'll never forget it. I had a friend I had an office in Beverly Hills, a training office after I retired from the Army. And I had a good friend, Robert Knight, who was the famous rock photographer. He was a photographer for Elvis Presley and everybody else. He toured with all the bands. In fact, he was a manager for a couple of famous bands. And he said to me one day, he says, "Ed, you got to do this show, this AM radio show." I said, "AM radio? You've got to be kidding, Robert." He said, "No, really, it's a big show." And he said that it would be right up your alley. So he talked me into doing it, and it wasn't a full show, 4-hour show. It was 2 hours. I sat down in my apartment in Beverly Hills next to Rodeo Drive, and I remember putting the phone down and saying out loud to myself, "I like that guy." It treated me very respectfully, and even though the subject of remote viewing and the very idea that the Department of Defense had a psychic spying unit was all totally beyond the alien to Art, that's how it started there. And then afterwards, in the next 6 months, I helped take affiliates. I increased affiliates by about 150 stations nationwide, worldwide actually, because people were fascinated with the subject of remote viewing and the idea that the Department of Defense was actually using this in our operations. I, as the operations and training officer, I couldn't talk about all the classified stuff, but remote viewing itself was not classified, so I could get away with a lot of that and talk to people about how it was being used after the CIA abandoned it.
Interesting, but you got labeled after being on Art's show as Dr. Doom, didn't you?
Yeah, Dr. Doom, because of my insistence about the kill shot coming and people need to be prepared for it. The reason that all that started was in the military unit, I used myself and my fellow viewers to look ahead because mind is outside of time. That caused problems originally until I understood that was the case and how to fix it. So looking ahead over the horizon, radar type of stuff, using remote viewing to look ahead, we were looking at possibilities and likelihoods of global warfare. So and my job earlier, before I stepped down from the Office of Secretary of Defense at celestial levels of government, my job was to prevent technological surprise on future battlefields. So I was very much enthralled with the idea of using RV to look ahead to see if there are any world wars on over the horizon, and I was particularly concerned with nuclear warfare. So people don't understand the technicalities involved in technical remote viewing, so I won't go there. But it takes a certain amount of work in order to sculpt the idea and script what you're going to do to use your mind to look over the horizon at certain specific things. So we did that, and we took a look, and there was something very, very big over the horizon. Now, because mind is outside of time, we cannot use calendrical time, monthly dates, in our work. We can't do it, because calendrical time is a construct, and that construct doesn't exist in the matrix as much as other constructs seem to do. I don't want to get too technical, but we found something very big going on, and it took about 6 months to determine the nature, the mechanics, and the dynamics about what was going on. It was like something of a global nature, but it was not war. It was not nuclear war. There were wars going on where all my own work demonstrated that all warring parties, mostly in the Mideast, look up in the sky and then disperse home. They go home because whatever is happening in the atmosphere, it eclipses the idea of the war that they're engaged in. It's so scary, and people go home. They just go home because it's so big. So we were pretty flummoxed about this, and took a lot of time to discover that it's not a nuclear war. It's our own star going on a rampage, producing mega flares that take down power grids. And because infrastructure is collapsed in the developed countries, you have more than a Mad Max scenario. You have millions and millions and millions of people dying because there simply is no starvation, predominantly. Yeah, the Mad Max scenario kills millions, but starvation takes out most people. And that's so that's why they call me Dr. Doom. They also called me Dr. Doom at the White House. I had to brief the president in biological warfare. I was a biological warfare case officer, a spy master. So I briefed at the White House on biological warfare and exotic weapons, and for instance, particle beam weapons that the Russians were developing, whether they were neutral or polarized, blah, 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 those kind of things, and other exotic things that the Soviets were developing. So I briefed the National Security Council directly, and I briefed at the West Wing and the White House on these kinds of things. But all that stuff is simply eclipsed by the kill shot sequence. And I wish it were not true, obviously. I'm a family man and sure would like to spend the rest of my years with my family. But things are, again, this is the peak, this is the beginning of Solar Max and Solar Cycle 25. And folks, take a look at the sun, the sun's visible disk today, and then you, not just the scientists, will start hand-wringing because watch out.
Well, I'm just thinking, even if we survive it, which we will for a while, but you just think about the internet going down. People's money nowadays is all tied up on debit cards, credit cards. How are people going to pull money out of the bank? I mean, everything's tied into the internet. Again, power companies, the grid, everything. It is really scary how we let ourselves get so ill prepared for anything like this to happen. And, we have Congress that could have actually beefed up our grid system for protect us on it. But, a lot of things is going on.
Well, Gary, there have been recently, within the last couple of years, because science realizes that, Dr. Doom is right. They're not laughing anymore. But steps are being taken to at least have at the ready some transformers. Now, these are built in China, like everything else. The transformers are built in China, and they're very heavy. It takes a couple of days to transport just one across town, and then a couple more days to install it. After the new ones against the burned out transformers, but it's too little, too late as far as my team is concerned. It's too little, too late. But something is better than nothing. That's for sure. And at least the public is aware of why scientists are afraid. And so people are taking a look at, what would happen, and listen to people talk like me, listen to people talk about what would happen if the grids go down and comma goes down. So X-rays reach Earth from a major solar flare. An X-ray will reach Earth in 8 minutes. What that will do is first take out, I'm not talking about single event latch-ups like you engineers are aware of with satellites. We'll ionize the satellite and take out comma. So no ATM machines. They'll take out at least a third of comma. And remember, the Earth is a rotisserie. So so after the 8 minutes are over and the satellites are destroyed, and it does other things to satellites too, the plasma that's inbound now, which takes about anywhere from, say, nominally 24 hours or more, and faster if it's back-to-back flares, one pushing against the other, accelerating it. That plasma will take the satellites that remain and force them into lower orbits. So the drag will be greater and their lifespan will be shorter. And now we have so many satellites up there. But the plasma is what takes down Earth's ionosphere and burns out transmitters. The ground currents that are induced from the plasma induce ground currents in Earth's long line, anything that's a long line, telegraph wire, for instance, or phone wire, or pipes under the Earth. There would be currents induced in those long wires, all pipes or comma wires. And that's what burns things out right there. And
how about it?
Literally destroys the material.
How about people's houses, which are connected to those long wires? I heard that could cause a lot of fires too.
Yeah, well, no, they'll be fine. And people worry about EMP, but EMP is being thrown around in conjunction with solar flares incorrectly. You can go and study that yourself. But EMP should rightly be associated with nuclear airburst, which will take out, at least within 500 miles, communications and capacitors, anything that's electronic. But it's very different than the phenomena that are associated with large solar flares. So you guys need to do your homework and differentiate between an airburst, a nuclear airburst, and a solar flare. Do that homework.
Okay. Now, what is going on with you and Bigfoot?
It's almost the acme of my career. I had spent years successfully. I think many of you know that the remote viewing unit, the SyFy unit, we used our work to determine a hotspot, a UFO hotspot, which turned out to be Chaco Canyon, New Mexico. And the Crown Prince of Liechtenstein, Hans Adam von Liechtenstein, who lost a son last year, he paid for our research out there. So I had all the best scientists, including Jacques Vallée, at various times in Chaco Canyon studying these phenomena. The best we got was CE2s. And I wanted a CE3, but that didn't happen. So technical remote viewers had to go back to the drawing board and find out, why we were not getting direct mano-a-mano contact. So we finally worked that out. What the answer is that we were not using the protocols that the system out there was demanding. The only way we could discern the protocols was using remote viewing, which forces at an evolutionary level in terms of consciousness tools. If consciousness tools have to be used for contact, then all of these other groups, and I was a member of the first group, I'll tell you about that in a minute, they're just babes in the woods. They have no idea what they're doing in terms of trying to use purely physical means to discern what's going on with these UFOs. I was a member of the first UAP study group way back in 1990, the very first member. I was the youngest member. We met off campus at the BDM Corporation SCIF, Sensitive Compartment and Information Facility, because they had contracts with the government, and they were the research R&D arm of the Ford Motor Corporation, which had plenty of classified contracts. So we used their facility to meet. I still have the attendee list and my notes of that meeting there. As I was a member of the first group way back then, and afterwards we realized that only consciousness tools can be used to really crack this nut called UFOs. And as I've recently mentioned, these are not ETs. There are ETs associated with the planet Mars in the past, but that's grist for another show. What we're experiencing down here on terra firma are ultraterrestrials. They are not extraterrestrials. These are wraith-like beings that can seem to parse back and forth from material existence and into another place. I won't call it dimension because I don't know, but they're like that. They're very wraith-like, very scary looking when you actually attempt to sketch them. And they have an artifact of their presence is a long-wave ultraviolet light. There's a flicker at the long-wave ultraviolet spectrum where you can see them. Animals pick this up quite easily, especially hummingbirds. They can perceive them too. And while we're on the subject, I hope it's okay to mention, because I do want to talk about art, is I listened to one of your shows a few days ago where you were talking about what it has now become my favorite subject is Bigfoot. And Bigfoot, I now know, it is indirectly or directly associated with the so-called UFO question. It's directly or indirectly associated with, and I've used my team and myself to establish a meeting point, not just an observation point, but a meeting point for Bigfoot, hoping to ask, who are you, telepathically, who are you and who are we, and take it from there and try to use them to learn from them, because they have to step down to our level. A lot of the things we're dealing with appear to be beyond our ken, beyond comprehension. But the first time we found the system out there was with the Ariel School event in 1994 in the town of Rua, outside of Harare, Zimbabwe. You guys can all read about that. So that's when we first discovered these entities. But I will have to say, when I listened to your show about the Travis Walton abduction, you said that you really I'm not so sure. In fact, you went beyond that and said you don't believe that it happened. It was real. And that's the second time that we discovered these wraith-like entities inside a physical thing that were dealing with Travis Walton. I'll have to.
The reason why I said that, Ed, is because I had a couple of his crew members on the show, and they dicted what Travis has been saying. They stepped forward because they were not happy with Travis Walton, and they said it never happened. So I'm aware.
I've discovered them as well too. All I'm saying, Gary, is that our technology, our technical remote viewing, our techniques and methods indicate right or wrong, correct or incorrect, that event was real, and that now he himself, there's no way he can comprehend what was going on to him, because it was way beyond his understanding. The bicameral brain can't process. Jacques Vallée was come to the same conclusion about ultra-terrestrials that I have, independent of myself. He knows that after an abduction experience, there's no common denominator for what happened to you in your experiences whatsoever. So you have to grasp at straws. There's just no common denominator at all for what's going on. And these entities, they're very extremely interesting. One thing I would like to say, I know that Whitley Strieber, who wrote Communion, is on your show tonight. And in his book Communion, when he's in this catatonic state and communicating telepathically what appears to be with a female of these, I call them grays if you want, but it's a disguise. One thing he says is, you have no right, telepathically, or he feels that at least, you have no right. And it says we do, which is very, very interesting and intriguing. Because let's say they do have a right. Who could that be? Well, there's only two classes of entities that could be: your parents and your creator. So for the longest time, the technical remote viewers, the military team has felt that these may be our progenitors. And coming back to look at this, but we feel they've been here the whole time. And we feel that they've, from work that we've done, they did something in the Rift Valley. They tweaked DNA. If we remote view the idea of an alien artifact, an extraterrestrial artifact, or an alien artifact, it comes up not with a physical thing, but with human DNA. So we trace that back to when that event occurred, and it was in the Rift Valley a long, long time ago. So we think that these entities have been associated with us and our development, or at least epigenetically our physical development, and they're trying to force our development now using consciousness is evolution. There's no evolution without consciousness. You know, mankind will continue to react without evolving the same way we've always reacted. But consciousness is evolution, and they're forcing. They want contact. That system out there wants contact with our progenitors, if that's what they are, whatever they are. But they're forcing us to the Project Blue Book hypotheses, all of the 10 working hypotheses, fail to describe the stuff in the sky. Book goes out. You know. So what the system out there, using all these sundry and ridiculous contact protocols, trying to force us to say, what are these? What's going on? What's going on? And that can only be done by looking at the phenomenon from consciousness, using consciousness tools that we've now developed, or at least in the beginning stages. And that's what we use to determine what are their protocols for meeting. It turns out in every case it's a place. If you build it, they will come. If you go there, they'll meet. And that's what we're doing with Bigfoot. Beginning in September, there's a place, rock solid place in the Stanislaus National Forest, not far from where I live, and are fairly easily accessible in my Jeep. And I've staked that out over a 6-month period, starting with daytime vigils and good cameras, and take it from there. If we fail, we fail. Nothing ventured, nothing gained.
Oh, Ed, our time is almost up. We got about 4 minutes left. Is there anything you want to share to the listeners about what you got planned, or Art Bell, whatever you want to talk about?
I think my favorite moment with Art Bell is when I used all the listening audience, including people who hate me. But if they're listening to me, I know how to grab their minds, like the old movie Global, The Village of the Damned, where the children turn their minds to the suitcase with a bomb in it. Yeah. I know how to use mass minds for our sister science, psychokinesis and telekinesis. And I said, okay, when I say go, and I didn't tell anybody what we were going to do. I said, when I say go, all of you listeners and myself, we're going to stop Art Bell's clock. Go. Now, even so, a moment of time for a human being is 3 seconds. Someday later, I'll go into all the dynamics behind that. But Art said, gee, Ed, I wish you wouldn't have done that. But anyway, my clock is, oh my God, you can listen to the show. Art had 2 clocks. He had one directly in front of him and one in the back. The one directly in front of him was an atomic clock. The one in the back was an analog clock, and it was slowing down. And he said, and during the break, he called me and said, Ed, please don't do that again. He said, I need my equipment. I said, okay, all right, here's what we'll do. Next time, instead of your clock, we'll do Larry King's pacemaker. So I had a lot of fun with Art.
Yeah. Well, Ed, I really enjoyed having you on. I would like to get you on sometime for about an hour or two and just talk general about whatever you want to talk about.
Well, like I say, next month starts my 6-month Bigfoot study, and that they're bait. The system is baiting us, and one of the ways they're baiting us is through the Bigfoot phenomenon. They're not what you think they are. But I know you like that subject, and I like it too, but I'm not willing to talk about it without further information, because I don't like to say what's already been said. So I'll go there and start, and I'll record it. I'll give you our video. let's just give you all the video, whatever happens, and or doesn't happen, and we'll go from there.
Okay, that sounds great. If you need some bait to lure one of those Bigfoot, I'll send my producer over with 5 gallons of peanut butter and jelly.
And I'll sit back with a 50 cal and watch what happens.
No, well, don't use the 50 cal. Get a camera and take pictures.
No, I'm certainly not going to be bringing any weapons. I'm bringing a spear. There's been unfortunately, a lot of mountain lion activity in that area. It's the second biggest Bigfoot location in California, so that's a good thing in terms of likelihood of spotting them. There's been a death or so close by in El Dorado National Forest. I have a spear, a very high-tech spear. So if I can see the cat before it gets me in the back, then I'm good on that. But I just it takes time away from my vigilance to have to worry about cats. Luckily, the area is fairly open, so I can see the cat coming if that happens. So it's not as bad as being in brush, which is really scary in cat country.
Well, Ed, you have a great weekend. And again, I want to thank you for taking the time to come on here tonight.
My pleasure, sir. It's great to meet you again in cyberspace, and I hope to do that over a bar someday up there in the Northwest.
Okay, my friend, you have a great weekend, will you?
Thanks, Gary. You as well.
Okay. Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to have Whitley on. So don't go anywhere. We should be back in about 4.5 minutes. So stay tuned, and we'll be back.
Take a journey of adventure and discovery for the enigmatic giants of the forests. Read On the Trail of Bigfoot by Mike Dupler. The author himself describes it this way.
Having found possible Sasquatch evidence, namely trees driven into the ground upside down, thought to be territory markers, led me to investigate this creature in my native Ohio. Several years and many forays into Bigfoot territory, I have found incredible evidence, which inspired my book, On the Trail of Bigfoot. Bigfoot is alive and has many fantastic abilities. The evidence is out there for all to see, but you need to know what to look for. My book will inspire those who have answered the call to seek this elusive creature, the Bigfoot. The truth is out there.
Read On the Trail of Bigfoot by Mike Dupler. Available now at Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and IndieBound.org.
So true, funny how it seems, always in time, but never in line for dreams. Head over heels, went toe to toe. This is the sound of my soul. This is the sound. I bought a ticket to the world, but now I've come back again. Why do I find it hard to write the next line? Oh, I want the truth to be said. I know this much is true. I know this much is true. With a thrill in my head and a pill on my tongue, there's all the nerves that have just begun. Listening to Marvin all night long. This is the sound of my soul. This is the sound
The strange news in brief. I'm Guy Ticker. Area 51 employee claims on his deathbed that he's seen living captured aliens at Area 51 in the mid-70s. He says they weren't like you hear about. He claims they don't look like what they're labeled to be. He says they look just like us. But he claims they are from a planet from another universe, and they're here to take over our world by destroying the human DNA. And they are walking among us. And he says it's a matter of time. Do you believe in E.T.? I'm Guy Ticker. The Strange News is brought to you by Night Dreams Talk Radio Network. Do you have a strange story? Contact us at nightdreamstalkradio.com.
You're listening to my friend Gary Anderson on Night Dreams Talk Radio, the best in paranormal radio.
Well, thank you, John. Well, JC, what happened? I lost you for a minute.
I think that the Skype or something.
Well, you know what? Whatever it did, you're on your camera microphone now.
Oh, no.
Yes, you are.
That's weird.
Yeah, well, whatever happened, maybe it was the atmospheric conditions of the plane of the ionic sphere getting a negative charge here tonight.
It's showing I'm on the right microphone.
Well, you're not. Trust me.
I believe you.
Well, who's our next guest?
Hey, our next guest is the one and only Whitley Strieber.
Okay, let's find out some information about Whitley.
He is the author of over 40 works of both fiction and nonfiction. He is Whitley Strieber. His books, The Wolfen, The Hunger, Communion, and The Coming Global Superstorm as The Day After Tomorrow, were all made into feature films. His sci-fi series, Alien Hunter, became the SyFy Channel series, Hunters. In 1985, Whitley had a close encounter of the third kind. It led to the writing of the epic bestseller, Communion, that changed the way the world thinks about this enigmatic experience. When he eventually realized that the experience could not be attributed to known factors, he began making an effort to recontact what he calls the visitors. The response has been ongoing for the past 30 years and has been chronicled in Communion, Transformation, Breakthrough, A New World. His most recent book, Them, analyzes both civilian and military close encounters. Whitley Strieber's website, unknowncountry.com, is among the largest in the world dealing with paranormal phenomena, and his podcast, Dreamland, has been produced weekly for 20 years.
Well, Whitley, welcome back to the show. How are you doing on this Friday night?
Thank you.
Yeah, we're having trouble here with the internet or something. Yeah. Maybe, because we had, Ed Dames on here. Again, how did you ever connect originally with Art Bell?
There's something here.
Yeah, you're not hearing me, or?
Oh no, I'm hearing you, but I'm also. Are you hearing an echo?
No, there's about a 5-second delay, and that goes away after a connection.
Okay, then I'm not going to worry about it. Art called me. He couldn't have had more than 10 stations at the time. He was just starting out. He had heard me on Larry King's radio show. Larry King had a radio show and a TV show at the time. He was on CNN and then on what was then a big radio network. And Art heard me on the radio network, and he called me up and said he wanted me to come on his show. And I said, okay, I'll do it. And that started a great friendship.
Oh, yeah. He thought very, very highly of you.
I thought highly of him, too. We had a wonderful friendship. Our wives, Ramona and Ann, got along really, really well. And we had a lot of fun together, as well as, doing a lot of great radio together.
Yeah, again, I was talking about how Art went from politics to talking about alternative things from UFOs to Bigfoot. If that never would have happened, shows like mine or yours might not be in existence.
Well, that's true. And it's interesting because Art was just moving into sort of the paranormal space when he first talked to me, as I recall. And in other words, as I recall, and I could be wrong, it's been a long time now, the show had a political side to it as well as a paranormal side. And I was one of the paranormal guests. And so, but yeah, and I think he basically went where his listeners were. And, there was a tremendously powerful reaction to this paranormal show because of Art's style, primarily. His way of handling it was so very different from the sort of yapping skepticism you got from everybody else. And all of a sudden, here's this guy just letting people say their piece.
And that's what made it interesting, too, because he was very inquisitive. And, he was always even asking me questions and off and on through the years and stuff. He always wanted to know.
That's right. He was inquisitive without being judgmental. Art was not judgmental. He in his personal life either. He was not a very judgmental person at all. And God knows he had plenty of opportunity with me because we horsed around a lot, let me put it that way, when we were together, and Ann and I used to go up to Pahrump. Art never came down here to California. That's not going to happen. And and of course, for the first part of the time we were doing broadcasts and being friends together, I lived in Texas. But when I moved out to California, we used to drive up to Pahrump fairly frequently. And I said, "Why don't you come down to see us?" And he did not like cities, and so he's not going to come to Los Angeles, unfortunately. And but they would drive out in the desert. They had that big, beautiful RV that they tooled around in. So, gosh, I remember the morning the phone rang, and it was Art. And he said, "I'm on my way home in the RV. Ramona died."
Yeah.
Just about collapsed. I couldn't believe my ears. She'd had asthma, and she smoked a lot. And he found her dead one morning in the RV.
Art took that so very hard. Again, she was a very warm person. I met her twice.
She was really fun. And
yeah.
Madam at one point in her life, and of course that fascinated me and Anne, and especially me. And I said, once I said to Mona, what is it all about? I mean, I've never done anything like that. And I was just wondering. She said, "Well, you don't have any kinks." I said, "Well, probably not. I don't think so." She said, "It's all kinks. That's what it's about." I thought that was amazing. That I would hear that she would say something like that. And they had met not in that context. They'd met another way.
Right.
And Anne thought Art was brave to marry Ramona because of this part of her background. And
she was also a witch too.
Well, yeah, but that wouldn't have stood in the way.
No, it wouldn't have. But Art was very open in a lot of ways. So I mean, I could really see it. I could tell you one thing: she could really cook.
Yes, she could. I remember some of those meals.
Yeah,
she could cook, and you're taking me back. I remember the time Art got some kind of a Go Devil car. Like do 140 miles an hour or something. And we're up there in the cars. And so he says to Anne, "So you want to go for a ride?" Anne says, "Of course not." Why not? She said, "I don't want to go 140 miles an hour. Anyway, you'll probably get stopped by the sheriff." He said, "No, the sheriff's not going to stop me. He knows all about the car." "Whit, what about you? You want to go for a ride?" I said, "Sure, I'll go for a ride."
Did you pee yourself?
What?
Did you pee yourself when you went for that ride?
but I was very curious as to whether or not the car was still on the ground at one point.
Yeah.
Dramatic, those long, straight roads. And we went as fast as that car would take us. And it was a hell of a lot of fun.
You know, it's only two people that ever scared me in being in a car with them. One was Art. The other was the actor James Gardner, which was a good, close friend of my father. And, you know, he's the one that did the Rockford Files and all the movies and stuff like that. And, you know, at one time, him and my dad, my dad, we lived in Seattle. He would come up occasionally on a summer and spend a few days with my dad. And he gave me a ride one time, and he showed me how you could do the Rockford, where you're going like 40 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour, and you do a complete 360 and go the other way. That was it.
Yeah, I have friends who were trained to do that kind of thing for various reasons. And, you know, can drive like really unbelievable. You can do extraordinary things in a car. But I don't think Art was too interested in that. What he was interested in was going fast.
Going fast, yeah.
And he was going fast. Art was going fast.
At one point, he had a Geo, if I remember right.
A what?
Old Geo. You know, the little four-banger.
Possibly. I don't know what these cars. I know nothing whatsoever about cars.
Yeah. Well, a type of car you wouldn't want to drive. How's that?
What's that?
A type of car that me and you would not want to drive.
No. I drive a Prius, and that's fast enough for me.
Oh, yeah. And so, you know, again, with Art, I mean, you know, here you took over a show, Unknown Country, which he created.
Well, Dreamland.
Dreamland.
And created Unknown Country, and I took over Dreamland.
Right.
One day, Art calls me up and says, listen, you want to take over the Saturday show, Dreamland? And I said, sure, I'll take it over. And he said, we're just tired. We can't, it's too much for us. We got to have more time off. They were working 7 days a week. And so I said, yeah, absolutely, I'll take it over. And I took it over, and I'll tell you, we broadcast from WOAI radio in San Antonio, but the program director didn't like Art's show and didn't like me at all. He was absolutely convinced that Communion was a load of baloney. And one day we walked in to do the show, and the studio had been torn down. It was just a heap of bookcases and things lying in the center of the floor. And so we were given courtesy at another station, KTSA in San Antonio, and they were just great to us. And we had a lot of fun there. One night, a UFO showed up over the station.
Oh, wow.
While we were broadcasting live, and the producers come in and say, everybody is outside. They see a UFO above the station. And, you know, and I'm trying to get to the break because I really want to go out and see that. And finally we get to the break. Kanan and I go rushing out, and it's gone. And all I know is it was described as square in shape. And that was interesting to me because that's the shape I used to see when I was a child. And I thought, my goodness, I wish I had seen that, but I didn't get to see it. Anyway, we had a lot of fun doing Dreamland. Then we changed to doing it from the house using a high speed line, and it was really, those were lovely days. Doing Dreamland on Saturday nights was a wonderful thing. And then I got told that Clear Channel wasn't going to run it anymore because it only had 350 stations, which sounded to me like a lot, but they were done. So I decided, well, I'll take it online and see what happens. I think it might have been one of the first podcasts. This was like in the late 90s. And now Dreamland on Unknown Country goes back, I believe, all the way to, we've got some shows from as early as 2002 and maybe even a couple from the 90s. But it's been continuous on the internet ever since those days.
Well, that is something, Art and you both should be, I'm sure Art was very proud of you, and that's something to carry on what he started. And it's still going on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And of course, George carries on Coast and does a beautiful job, I think. I'm going to be on his Gaia show sometime this month or next month. I recorded a couple of weeks ago. So, so Art's legacy is huge. I mean, Coast is still going, and there's God knows how many podcasts spun off of Art. Many, I would think.
I did research with the AI. I hate to say it. I have been totally against AI to about a month ago. And when my son came up to me, he goes, "Why aren't you using AI?" So I do research now with AI like you wouldn't believe. But, there's over 1 million podcasts doing what me and you do. And when you think about there's 1 million of them, only a small percentage gets a lot of listeners. And, and it's because a lot of people don't know what they're doing. And that's the whole point. Like I listen to you quite often because, it's relaxing. It's informative. And, I base my show, basically what I have done for 50 some years is kind of based on what kind of Art does and Art did and what I did. And I joined them together. And, I think people are still starving for that.
Yeah. Well, it's what we're doing right now. We're having a conversation and telling a story because you are an expert. You know what you're doing. And so did Art. And I learned from Art how to do this, and from his producer, Alan Corbett, who is a wonderful guy and still very much with us. How do you tell a story, and how do you get to the point where you have a radio voice? And Alan said, you will find the voice when you start to imagine the presence of the audience. And that was true. And, because when I started out, I didn't have a radio voice. By a radio voice, I don't mean like an announcer voice. I mean a voice that is like your voice and like Art's voice that comes into the room and is part of the conversation in your home or in your car. It's someone who feels like they are there and they belong there. That is a good radio voice. And Art had one of the best radio voices in the world. He was fabulous at that.
Well, his voice would intrigue people, and it's just like it would, like magic, draw you into it. One thing a lot of people don't know too, and I know you probably know this, Art kind of like put on shows because he liked this, seeing how the audience would respond. What did you think about when he did stuff like that?
Oh, I loved it. In fact, one time I used to do on Unknown Country every year, we would do April Fool's jokes. And one year I came up with some incredibly absurd thing. And Art read it on April Fool's as a news story. Something like, I'm forgetting which one it was, but it was something along the lines. One of them was that it had been found that the reason Tyrannosaurus Rexes had those small hands is that they used canes. It was something like that. Anyway, it was really a total nonsense story. And he argued with everyone, insisting that the story was real because it's on which website, and he doesn't joke around. Of course, he knew perfectly well it was an April Fool's joke. It was really fun to listen to. He said, "You better listen to the show tonight."
Well, I remember the one about the experimental plane flying over Area 51. And, Art told me he was going to be doing that one. It was a put on. He wanted to see how the audience would respond. And, he even had one of his friends call in. He had sound effects record, of cannons firing. And here's this guy in an experimental plane flying over Area 51. Then the F-16s or whatever planes were right there next to him, motion them to land. the guy didn't do it. Then all of a sudden you hear the cannons firing, boom, 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 which you're not going to hear in a plane, and being picked. But, people bought it. And that's what made the show great. As Art always told me, he said, Gary, it's entertainment, and you need to entertain the listeners.
Yeah. Well, it's the ongoing things in the show, like Mel's Hole and the appearances of JC.
Will you tell the listeners about Mel's Hole, please? Nobody believes me on that one.
I don't know what to say. I'm not sure what you want me to say.
I know that it got to the point when after the story went on a couple of times. The last one was supposed to have been in Nevada with the Hopi Indians, which they're not in Nevada. They found another hole in the ground, which they lowered a goat into it. And all of a sudden the goat quit making noise, and then they brought it up, and then it burst open and like a penguin came out of it.
Yeah, that's believable.
Yeah, but people bought it, and that's what made Art so unique. He could pull that off. I couldn't pull something like that off.
Pull that stuff off. One time there was a chupacabra scare on in Mexico, and suddenly I began to get emails from people in South Texas saying that there were chupacabras being seen in South Texas. Of course, it was all in fun. I mean, so I call Art and I say, listen, let's do a show because there's people telling me there's chupacabras coming up toward San Antonio in South Texas. He says, oh, great. We'll do it tonight. So we get on and I'm talking about this stuff. And in one of the breaks, my brother, who is one of the great master pranksters of all time, calls me and says, now I have to explain something here. I'm going to back up and amend this. There's a place in San Antonio on Fort Sam Houston, the old military base, which is there to this day, called the Quadrangle. It's the original fort that was there, built there in the 1840s or something. And it's beautiful inside. It's got gardens and there are tame deer in there. Okay. And so we're going on about chupacabras and we're getting reports from South Texas and everything else. And so my brother calls me during the break, says, Whitley, all the deer have disappeared from the Quadrangle. And we go back into one of those real short pieces between, where there's a break, then there's a short piece and another break. And I say to Art, I've got an incredible piece of news, because I had bought into this nonsense. I was busy. I wasn't thinking clearly. But while we're in the second break, I realize it's a prank. It's not true. And so Art says, what's the incredible news when he comes back? And I just changed the subject. I don't know what to do. I can't say, well, it died. And he's going, well, what was it? What was it? And I said, oh, I forget. And there were moments, a lot of moments like that. And, we always rolled with it. Art could roll with anything, boy.
Oh, he could. And that's what made radio fun, to do stuff like that. I'm going to be honest with you. Talk radio has really changed. A lot of shows are a lot of hype, and I can't stand that. I like it like we were talking right now. I think people miss that. And, I think that's the important thing, to carry on the whole show like that.
Because that other type of delivery doesn't last, and it just doesn't, and it doesn't satisfy people, and they drift away after a while. I hope. I mean, maybe they won't, but to me, talk radio is talk radio. And it's people talking, conversing, exploring things together, going down various strange pathways like Art and I used to do, and Art used to do with all of his guests. And and it should be fun. It needs to always be fun. That's very, very important.
That's what brings the people back. Now, you're in the process, a new book. What can you tell the listeners about the new book?
Oh, my. Well, first of all, the new book is going to be out in December. I was set to publish it in October, and I thought, you fool. You're not going to publish a book a month before a national election and expect to get anywhere with it. You won't get any shows or anything. And so I'm going to publish it in early December. And it is about the bodies and minds of our visitors. It is the first book ever written like this. There's never been another, and there won't be another until and if something comes out from the government. But I have worked for years piecing this together, and I'm quite sure it's accurate. So that's what the next book is about. It's going to be called The Fourth Mind. The current book, Them, is a different story entirely. What I did there was, I have to go right now to my letters. We got thousands and thousands of letters in over the years and saved a great number of them. She analyzed them. She cataloged them. We made a book called The Communion Letters from them years ago. And in all these years since then, 20 years, I've been understanding more and more and more. And so Them is in two parts. The first part analyzes 11 of these letters. And the second part analyzes the military response to the phenomenon, which I have learned a great deal about over the years. And there's nothing I know to be classified in the book, for sure. I know that. I mean, I don't have any access to classified materials. I don't own any. Never even seen a classified document in the flesh. So that's not what it's about. But there's never been another book like it, and there's never going to be another book like it again. I mean, there's never going to be another book like the next one either, because I'm at the edge of this thing, very much at the edge of it, and I'm not going to fall off that edge either. I know where I am, and I know what I'm doing, I'm pretty sure.
Well, the last time we talked, which was about 2 years ago, you were talking about they were communicating with you. Are you still getting communications?
Oh, yeah, the implant. I was referring to the implant in my left ear.
Yeah.
Works very well. And it's not like a whispering voice at all, though. It's a whole different ball of wax. And what happens is I wake up. For years, they would wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning. And they would blow in my face. They would do all kinds of things. Some of them quite a bit of fun, and some of them not so fun at all. To make me up, and I would go and I would sit in the living room, the chair where I meditate, and do a meditation, take my thoughts, take my attention out of my thoughts and put it on my body, and information would come in, and it was not like downloads or channeling at all. It would just be there, and I learned that I could write using this, and it would point me in the right direction when I was doing research. And some of it's very obscure research. Nowadays, when you do most of your research in using AI, and I use a couple of AIs because they do hallucinate, and you don't want to believe something AI says until at least 2 and preferably 3 AIs all say the same thing.
Yeah.
You got to be real careful about that if you're a serious researcher. Anyway, it helps me with prompts, AI prompts now, and it also brings information into my life in very strange ways, with synchronicities or things appearing just at the right moment on the internet and stuff. It's been doing this now for years, ever since I started. The first book I wrote with it was Afterlife Revolution, right after Annie passed on. And then I wrote a new world with it, and then I wrote them with it, very intensely involved, and now the engagement is total. It's part of my being. The implant, it feels like when the implant turns on, like my mind gets bigger. It's the most valuable asset I have. And thank goodness I didn't get it taken out. My wife was really smart about this stuff. And she always said, don't get it taken out. Don't get it taken out. And I tried one time, and we got a video actually that's on my website of the attempt to take it out. And this failed because the doctor opened up the little area where it is in my ear, and when he touched it with a scalpel, it ran down into my earlobe under the skin. And of course, he knew I had written communion, but he thought he was taking out a cyst. But when that happens, he thinks, you could see it in his face, my God, it's not a cyst. It's an alien implant. I'm getting out here. So he says, well, I can't actually take this out. I'd have to take your ear off. And he puts a little stitch in it and pulls out. 2 days later, I feel a burning sensation in the ear, and the implant goes from my earlobe back up to where it is to this day. And I never touched it again. And now it's the lifeblood of my research.
Wow. That is really heavy what you're saying. Now, before the time is going by so fast here tonight, what do you feel about disclosure? To me, a lot of people get mad when I say this, but everything I've seen from Congress, it has been to appease people, but nothing has really come out. A lot of denials have come out. When they had people testify, you had two people in the camp, the people saying that, yes, there are bodies, yes, that we have crashed, UFOs. Then you got the people from the Pentagon, the CIA, and all these other people say, and the military, no, we have never recovered any alien craft. Roswell never happened. All this stuff. And then, we were going to be informed on a regular basis what's going on. And then all of a sudden, well, it's sealed for 25 years. I mean, what's your whole take on this?
Well, first off, Roswell, my uncle Mickey and General Arthur Exon, who were close friends, were young officers in the Air Materiel Command at Wright Field, working under General Twining, when the debris and the bodies were brought in. General Exon, then I believe a major, he may have been a major and my uncle a captain, I think, held one of those bodies in his arms. And therefore, it happened. It happened. And the stories that have been told about it are lies. And there's a reason. The reason is that the Air Force is charged with protecting us from threats from above. And they can't protect us from this threat. Therefore, under the National Security Act of 1947, they are not allowed to reveal this information until they have a handle on it. And since they've never gotten a handle on it, they can't reveal it. And that's where they are. And they're taking a lot of heat because they are obeying the law. Now, the visitors, and I get into this very deeply in them, in the part of them that is about the military, they orchestrated the secrecy from the very beginning. They did it. They did it through clever social engineering. I don't think they ever arrived in anyone's office and said, you have to keep this secret. I don't think that's how they work. But I think they are in total control of this whole thing. If anything about them comes out, it'll be because they allowed that to happen. They are absolutely in control. And we don't even understand how they do it. And it's not mysterious. It's not some mind control ray or something. It's just very clever, very intelligent social engineering.
But here's my concern. Are they friendly or are they foe? Because I don't know what to believe. After doing, like, you've been doing it for quite a few years. I've been doing this for 50 some years. I've had so many people on it, and I'm really on the fence here. Maybe some of them are here to help mankind, or maybe to study us. I don't know what's going on. And then I think, I just look at the human race from the beginning from Cain and Abel to now. Look what's going on our planet. And then I just look at maybe beings from another planet, even regardless how far advanced they are, maybe they could still have the same type of traits. That's what I want to know.
Well, I have had the impression that they definitely have a history, and not necessarily one that they were too interested in us finding out about. Why would you cross the universe if that's how they got here? Well, you might do it out of curiosity, or you might be driven to it because you need something. And it's highly likely that all of the above are going to turn out to be the reasons. And as far as there being either negative or positive presence, they're both. They're just like, turn it around. Say, we can travel the stars or pass through dimensions or whatever, however you do it. And we find a planet where they don't have any idea that anyone else in the universe exists except them. They're just, in other words, like us. But we are a star-traveling cosmic species. We've had a lot of experience. The first thing that's going to happen is our scientists are going to say, don't disturb them. We need to analyze this civilization. This is a precious thing. We need to be very careful with it. And then maybe other people are going to say, biologists are going to say, well, wait a minute, we want to know what their bodies are like. So we're going to go in very discreetly and take some samples. And in other words, as I talk, you're seeing I'm building a picture of what's happening to us. And I think that's exactly what's happening to us. And I think that they will they are in the process probably of drawing conclusions about the degree to which they want to engage with us. And I don't think that if suddenly the government says, well, we were lying all along and they are real, and we have bodies at Fort Detrick and so forth and so on, they won't necessarily come out. Why would they? I mean, they might want to come out. If they're doing things that we don't like, which obviously they are. I mean, I got abducted and I had sexual material taken from my body, and I did not like it. And I don't think anybody who's had that happen does. So are they going to come out? Probably not. Not until they no longer need to do things that we either don't understand or don't want. And as to whether or not they're good or bad, they're both, and they're everything in between.
Just like humans are. Hey, Whitley, I want to thank you so much for coming on. Again, where can they get your latest book, and how can they what nights of the week can they find your show?
Okay. Get my book on Amazon.com. I read my own books, and they're available on Audible, and you can get them by just going and checking on Whitley Strieber at Amazon. Some of them are available on Barnes & Noble as well. My podcast comes out, fresh podcast, every Friday night, and is available free for the first week with ads, and available all the time for subscribers without ads. And it's a wonderful podcast. The site, unknowncountry.com, has got The podcast goes back all the way to 2002, and it's a tremendous adventure to listen to it.
Well, again, I want to thank you so much for taking the time and coming back on the show.
Well, thank you for having me, and God bless Art Bell wherever you may be.
Well, I hope he didn't listen to John Lear, but John Lear, I had him on 2 weeks before he passed, and he said, don't go into the to the light, that, the white, go into the darkness. I hope Art Bell didn't go into the darkness. That always had Art Bell confused at that point, by the way.
I'm telling you, I'm the type of guy who's definitely going to choose the dark simply because it's there.
Me too. Well, Whitley, you take care.
You too.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, we'll be back with our next guest. Again, Whitley is always exciting to have on. Again, you're watching and us on Night Dreams Talk Radio. We'll be back right after this break, so stay tuned. On all 24 time zones worldwide. This is Night Dreams Talk Radio. I am the host. I am so honored to have each one of you as a listener to the show. Are you ready to dive deep into the wacky, the strange, the deepness of paranormal? UFOs to cryptics to earth changes. Well, stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Take a journey of adventure and discovery for the enigmatic giants of the forests. Read On the Trail of Bigfoot by Mike Dupler. The author himself describes it this way.
Having found possible Sasquatch evidence, namely trees driven into the ground upside down, thought to be territory markers, led me to investigate this creature in my native Ohio. Several years and many forays into Bigfoot territory, I have found incredible evidence, which inspired my book, On the Trail of Bigfoot. Bigfoot is alive and has many fantastic abilities. The evidence is out there for all to see, but you need to know what to look for. My book will inspire those who have answered the call to seek this elusive creature, the Bigfoot. The truth is out there.
Read On the Trail of Bigfoot by Mike Dupler. Available now at Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and IndieBound.org. Want to talk to Gary and his guest? Broadcasting to you live in his underwear. Sorry. From the studios of Night Dreams Talk Radio, you're listening to Gary Anderson. He's the bomb.
The size of nuclear bombs today has evolved from the 1960s so that they are smaller but more accurate.
Hey, are we talking about weapons or Gary?
Even if the total megatonnage was actually less, the explosive force would be spread out more efficiently across the metropolitan area. So in that case, the actual destruction would be even greater than what I'm about to describe now.
Yeah, we're talking about Gary. On the radio, on the internet, and in worldwide syndication. Get ready for the ride of your life.
The destruction that I'm about to describe is likely an underestimation of what would actually happen. It still gives an adequate sort of approximation of the effects. So here we go.
Here's Gary.
And here I am. JC, I got a question for you, my friend. Would you go, when you pass on, which, it's going to happen, isn't it? I don't know anybody it hasn't. But when you pass on, are you going to go to the light? Are you going to go to the darkness? Which one would you choose? And why?
I'm probably going to go to the light because I think my relatives will be there waiting for me, or loved ones, I guess you could say. That's what I think. But you know what? Only time will tell, really.
I don't know. John Lear still has me puzzled on that one because, he said, it could be a trick. So if you go into the light, you're actually going into darkness. If you go into darkness, you could be going into the light.
Yeah, didn't he say one of the last shows?
Yeah, he said that he wasn't sure about it anymore.
Yeah, I remember he saying that.
No, I'm not sure.
No, well, how can we prove it? I mean, really, unless you talk to somebody who went there and back. But even then, maybe that's just a memory, your mind that created that scene. You know what I'm saying?
What I'm really concerned about, the day I die, they're going to announce all over the news they found a way to prolong people's lives another 100 years.
It puts you on a computer with AI running through your veins.
Oh, yeah. That's very interesting. Think about AI. Do you want your thoughts to continue with AI after you pass on? Could you imagine I could be sitting there talking to JC, the hitman, long after you're gone? Maybe I'll have some interesting conversations. I don't know. But you know, our next guest, James Goodall, first appeared on my friend's show, Art Bell, November 14th, 1993. Let's find out some information about our guest. So here it is.
How did a kid who grew up in the middle of a former apricot orchard that's now called Silicon Valley end up as one of the world's leading experts on the Lockheed Skunk Works, Area 51, and things that go bump in the night? Well, for Jim Goodall, it started with a handful of random events. His very first exposure, and ultimately his love for all things Skunk Works and airplanes in general, began with a brief encounter that cemented his fascination and love for airplanes. The time was 1950 or 51. Jim lived in a duplex not far from what was the small San Jose Municipal Airport. He was about 5 years old and had gone to bed just before sunset. As he was getting settled in, his dad went into his room and said, "There's something coming, and I think you should see it." They went outside and saw not one, not two, but 24 Corvair B-36 Peacemaker heavy bombers on their way to Travis Air Force Base. Jim was hooked. Moved forward a few years and his family now called Los Altos, California home. In 1954, his best friend's dad was commander of Moffett Field Naval Air Station, at the time one massive base with over 400 aircraft assigned there. On one particular day, his friend said he had something to show him. There was an area roped off with curtains shielding something very special. There were no guards, just a sign that read, "Off Limits." Too tempting for a couple of 7-year-olds. Behind the curtain was the still-secret Lockheed XF-104 Starfighter. Jim's friend then threw down the gauntlet. Get in the cockpit. So he did. And the latch malfunctioned. He was stuck. The only way out was to call the Marines and the Shore Patrol, and they were pissed. Nearly 70 years later, Jim reports, his butt still hurts. Fast forward to March of 64. Jim was an 18-year-old airman second class on temporary duty at Edwards Air Force Base. At approximately 3:15 p.m., Jim Goodall saw what was to change his life forever. On the XB-70 test pad was what he first thought was the North American X-15 rocket plane. But the people were way too small. Much to his amazement, he had his first glimpse of the incredible Mach 3 Plus Blackbird in full afterburners, the YF-12A. And Jim has never been the same.
Well, welcome to the show. And I got to ask you a question. You got in that cockpit. Did your friend kind of coax you into that cockpit, or did you do that on your own?
He said he double dog dared me to get into the cockpit. So I did.
And you closed it.
Yeah, and we latched it, and we just figured that was just that's the way it was, and everything was be fine. And I was in there about a minute and a half, 2 minutes, and all of a sudden I realized I'm sitting on an ejection seat. I didn't realize this was a downward ejection seat. And I didn't, at my age, I'm 8 or 9 years old. I wasn't familiar. I wasn't that familiar with airplanes yet, even though I was fascinated by them. As an adult, I would have known that they weren't going to put it in a wind tunnel at Ames, wind tunnel complex there at Moffett Field, with explosive devices in the ejection seats. So for that part of the fear wasn't there, but I started to panic, and I'm a little bit claustrophobic, but boy, did we get our butts chewed. And but I've had a passion for things that come out of the mind of Kelly Johnson and the Lockheed Skunk Works from that point forward. It's been a passion of most of my life. I had the honor and the privilege of meeting 6 of the 11 heads of the Skunk Works, starting with Kelly and Ben Rich, Jack Gordon. My mind is starting to go blank. Jeff Babion. Come on. Yeah. And a couple of the other ones. And it's just, it's an honor that I don't know how I was selected for this honor. I mean, Ben Rich and he loved what I did. He loved my passion. And at the time, my dear friend John Andrews, he was the one who was sort of the catalyst that brought everything together. And I met John because he was the development director for Testers Model Corporation. And he was at the Air Force Museum, and he was talking to a mutual friend, Dave Menard, an old crotchety retired master sergeant. And he was, when he retired, he moved. He ended up in Dayton, Ohio, and he volunteered initially. And then he became in charge of research. So John Andrews and Dave had been friends for 20 years at that particular point, maybe longer. And John Andrews asked Dave Menard, he said, I've tried to talk to everybody. I'm getting nowhere. Who is the most knowledgeable person you know that will talk to me that knows anything about the Blackbird? He said, well, you got to get hold of Jim Goodall somehow. And so a couple of days later, I get a phone call from John. And that started, this is like 74, maybe 75. And that started a 25-year friendship up until he passed away. I think it was 99. John Andrews is one of those rare individuals that come in out of people's lives where you can find nobody that has a negative thing to say about John. He was just one of those guys. And all the times that we spent out in the desert, sleeping in the dirt, trying to make sure we didn't curl up to any timber rattlers when we're on top of Bald Mountain there in the Groom Range right in front of the base.
Well, James, did you do anything stupid like John Lear did in that area?
Oh, John Lear and I did a lot of stupid things, and
I got to ask you a question.
I met John Lear through my friend John Andrews, and getting to know John Lear. And those of you who never had the opportunity to meet one of the most unique aviation interests in the world, John, I think, was flight certified as a pilot in 62 different aircraft. Most of them had military derivatives. He was a certified A&P at the time of his death, 2 years ago. He still had 15 or 16 FAI world records where he flew around the world on his 16th birthday in one of his dad's Lear 23s. And he is the craziest son of a gun I've ever known in my life. And you didn't know if he was pulling your leg or if he was telling the truth half the time. But everything that I'm doing today, I can thank because of John Andrews. And John Andrews introduced me to John Lear. John Lear introduced me to George Knapp. And John Lear introduced me to Bob Lazar. And that by itself is just an absolutely incredible series of events. And I met Bob before he went to work out in the desert.
Well, I want to backtrack for something. One thing that John Lear said a couple of times on my show, were you there when there was a party going on and he went and rented a car from one of those, car leasing places for the day, and he brought it down to near Area 51, and they had a machine gun and they had a helicopter?
I wasn't there for that particular event, but I saw some of the remnants of that particular event. And I mean, John did so many crazy things, and I didn't think he was going to make it past 2015. I used to go visit him multiple times a year. So I lived in Minnesota most of that time. So I wasn't close by. I didn't live in California or like where I'm living today in Arizona. So when I had an opportunity to go out in that area for business, and I would make business to make sure that I can get out there. And we had some of the most fun, some of the craziest things I've ever encountered. But because of John, I mean, everything else in my life, everything I'm doing today, all comes out of that particular introduction in 1973-74. So
yeah, but go on. James, if you really think about it, I'm going to just go back to that Hertz rent-a-car. Could you imagine he goes in and rents a car? And when you rent a car, they walk around it. Oh, see, it's no scratches, no dents. And from what John said, when it was all shot up with machine gun holes, right? And they had to take it back on a car trailer, and they take it back to Hertz or Enterprise, whatever one it was. Yeah. Could you imagine whoever rented the car to him probably peed themselves? And John said, they said, what happened to the car? And he said, with a straight face, he said, I said, this is what happens when you park the car in the wrong place in Las Vegas.
That's true. It's true. I mean, and he pulled stunts like that all the time. I mean, John was he was a walking, living, breathing legend, but he was also one of the biggest characters to ever walk this earth. I mean, he was funny. He's done so many things. I mean, he was flying O2 Skymasters from Hamilton Air Force Base in San Rafael off on San Francisco Bay out of San Rafael. That's and he was filling up with fuel. He had fuel tanks in where the avionics bays, where he had fuel tanks where the passenger would be. And he flew dead reckoning from there to Hawaii. And he said the first time he ferried the aircraft, and he made good money doing it, is his indicator on his fuel gauges was he was below critical fuel. And still did not have in sight the Hawaiian Islands. He didn't care which one, the Big Island, Maui, or Oahu. And he was just hoping that his navigation and his radio fix was good. As it turns out, he made it. But then he flew it from there, I believe, to Midway. I think he stopped in Guam until he delivered the aircraft into Vietnam. I think he had 3 or 4 flights like that, and they were all hair-raising, fingernail biting flights, but he was a one-off.
Yeah.
He was a one-off.
Yeah.
And the thing about John, when you see what he's done, you say no one person could do all the things that John and that's wrong. I mean, John Lear, excuse me, did everything he said he did. I mean, he was, besides being an incredible pilot, certified to fly 62 different aircraft types, he was also a certified A&P mechanic. And he had some other titles behind him. I mean, working with his dad and working for his dad, everything was aviation related. So he had Jet A and avgas running through his blood. It was what his destiny was. And when we lost him in 2000, I think it was 22.
Yeah, around there. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm surprised he made it as far as he did. Because when I saw him, I can remember the time I saw him in 2015, first of all, John had been in 3 airplane crashes where he had just literally destroyed his feet. And even when he was flying L-1011s for American Transair, he could hardly put his feet on the pedals, your ailerons and whatever, without extreme pain. And I actually rode jump seat behind him in an L-1011 from Vegas to Minneapolis. I could see him limits when he was taxiing primarily. And it was something, he was always in pain, but some doctor put him on almost a lethal dose of painkillers where he was sleeping for 3 or 4 days at a time. He'd be up for a couple hours and then go back to sleep. And one of his daughters, I think it was Allie, was watching her dad just waste away with this nasty opioids. And she got together with some friends. They dried him out, and they got him off of everything. And he was at the end of his life. He was still in a lot of pain, but he was no longer hooked on opioids. And when he had to quit flying, when they pulled his ticket at age 60, I thought he was going to go auger in somewhere because he just couldn't deal with it. He had been flying his entire life. I think he started flying when he was 10 or 11, and that's why when he soloed around the world. Now he had an FAI inspector in the airplane, in the Learjet, but he was still at 16. He was an accomplished pilot. And the thing about it, Arthur Godfrey was gonna try to set the world record and had set everything up. And Bill Lear had found out about it. So 2 weeks before Arthur Godfrey was going to start his around the world flight, and he had all the stations loaded up with fuel, with food, with anything they needed. He just took that away from Arthur Godfrey and made the flight. And you couldn't do it today because he was allowed to fly through Iran. He was allowed to fly through the southern part of the former Soviet Union and across parts of China and Tibet. On his way around the world. And it's just something that could not be done today, excluding the wars that are going on in this crazy world we're living in today. Even in a peaceful world, you would never have gotten the permission as we did as if he tried to do it today. So those records will stand long after I'm pushing up weeds. So
yeah. Now I got to ask you a question. How did you come about being on Art Bell's show starting November 14th, 1993? You were noted on the show about talking about secret projects, UFO, and government conspiracies. You were kind of famous on the show about that.
Yeah, well, John Lear was pushing me towards that, and my mind is going blank right now. George Knapp is the one who said, well, you got to come on. He said, we have a slot on such and such a day. So I got on, and one of the things that irritated, I don't know if it irritated him, but I know he wasn't pleased with me. He asked me a question, and I said, Art, I don't give yes or no answers, so this may be a long one. I said, well, go ahead. What's the answer? So I started going, and after about 20 minutes, he said, we're out of time. So, and that happened with George Norrie. That happened with George Knapp on Coast to Coast, and it happened with Art. And it's just, I don't know if I'm a motor mouth or I just have too much information crammed in between my ears and a need to get it out. So it's just one of those things that I've always enjoyed talking about my passions, and my passions are things that go bump in the night, Area 51, and of course the Lockheed Skunk Works.
Well, I got to ask you a question. What did you think about disclosure, and do you feel like we are being visited?
if I had any money, I've had too many ex-wives. If I had any money, I would bet every dime I had to say that before I leave this planet, I think we're going to be. I think it's not going to be disclosure. I think it's going to be acknowledgement more than anything. I think we're going to have a landing. I think it's going to be significant, and I just hope it isn't like Mars Attacks.
Well, I got plenty of popcorn and barbecue sauce just in case it is.
Yeah. So, anyway, it's due, and with everybody carrying in their back pocket or their purse or their shirt pocket a high resolution digital camera that has all the knowledge of the world in it. And plus you can make phone calls on it or light up your tent if it's dark. iPhones and smartphones have changed the world of ufology. And that by itself is going to be pushing the envelope for release of information that we know it's there. I mean, I interviewed a number of different people of very high standings, ones you wouldn't question what they did. One of them was my boss in the Air Guard, Major General Wayne Gatlin. And he asked, I was the state staff historian with the Minnesota Air Guard, and I asked General Gatlin one afternoon, I said, General Gatlin, I got a question. Do you believe in UFOs? And he said, yeah, I chased one. I said, oh, really? He said, yeah, I was mid-50s. They're standing alert at Duluth Air Force Base. They're in F-94Cs. And Finley Air Force Station says we have a fast mover over the middle of Lake Superior. Now, you don't go over the middle of Lake Superior. I think even today, unless you're flying high, if you're a private pilot or a single engine aircraft, you don't go crossing the Lake Superior at the widest point because it makes its own weather. So they launched 3 F-94Cs. They head out as fast as they can. And General Gatlin was a major at the time. And he said they got a visual on it, and his weapon systems operator, also called a WISO, he turns on his weapons radar, and every time it locks, the power dies. I mean, the radar just dies. So they pull the circuit breakers, reset the circuit breakers, try it again, and it every time it locks on, it did that like 3 or 4 times in a row. So General Gatlin said he wanted to get closer. He was going to fire his 2.75-inch rockets at it if he got close enough. So he put it in an afterburner. Afterburner, you can only do it for about 90 seconds before you run out of gas. And this thing is heading directly towards the radar station. They had a geodesic dome. It's right on the shoreline of Lake Superior. And they're just heading towards Finley. And Finley said it's heading right towards us at a high rate of speed. It didn't go by us. It stopped. It disappeared. And General Gatlin said he's still in burner. He squints his eyes and looks, and he said, well, one of the reasons why you're not seeing it on radar, it's directly above you. So those guys went running out, and when they were running out, this thing went straight up. And it was northern Minnesota. There's no pollution up there. At least there wasn't back, especially in those times, but there wasn't any pollution at all in my 27 years in Minnesota. And you could see, you could almost see the stars during the day. The sky was so clear. And it was a orb. It wasn't a saucer, but it was just a round silverish ball, and it went straight up. And General Gatlin couldn't believe how fast this thing rose, and it went out of sight, and that was the end of the event. So I asked, now this is 1984 when I'm talking to General Gatlin, and I said, sir, assume today I was enlisted, so I'm not a pilot, but I say, assume I'm a pilot flying on F4, and I encounter the same thing you did. What do I do? He said, when you get back to the base, you go through your debrief, you go take a shower, you go to the club, you slam down 2 or 3 real strong ones, and you go home and you forget about it. I said, well, you're not going to report it? And he said, first of all, there's no mechanism in the mid-'80s. There's no mechanism for reporting an unknown aerial phenomenon, also known as a flying saucer. And it would destroy your career.
Oh, it did, because, I used to know back years ago, you remember Republic Airlines?
Oh, yeah.
I used to know one of the vice presidents with it. And, when he was in the military, Air Force, during Vietnam, he was coming over, dropping over North Vietnam, what he classified eggs, which were bombs. And on the way back to Guam, I think it was, he said he looked off of his, cockpit window. Off the wing, there was a UFO. And, his co-pilot advised him, don't report it. Well, he reported it. And then a few minutes later, he got a message. When you land, do not depart out of the craft till we give you permission. When they landed, he said it was surrounded by military police with armed, M16s, and the crew was all separated. And he wanted to retire as a brigadier general. That was his goal. And he was told his military career was over.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I had another gentleman, his name Dave Fruhoff. Dave Fruhoff was an SR-71 pilot, and he's flying a night mission. Now, this is near the late December of 72, early January 73. And he said it's 11 p.m. at night. It's 2,300 hours. He's at 78,000 feet. He's flying at Mach 2.7, which is sort of a sweet spot going to and from target. If you go up to Mach 3.2, you create a lot of thermal stress on the SR-71. And by going to 2.7, you still get there. And just before you approach your target area, then you accelerate up to Mach 3.2 and try to get above 82,000 feet. And all of a sudden, Dave, and it's a 3/4 moon, it's off the left side of the SR-71. He's heading straight. I'm not sure what direction, but he was heading straight. And he said all of a sudden he gets a glint off something reflective 5 or 6 miles away and 6,000 or 7,000 feet above him. He gets on secure voice and calls the command post of Kadena and asks if we have another bird up. He said, well, you were at the briefing. You're the only one up there. He said, no, I'm not. I'm going to go take a look. So his backseater said, hey, Dave, we have company. I said, yeah, I'm going to go take a closer look. So he advances the throttle. He has about a 10-degree bank, and he's climbing. And he's going above, Mach 2.8, 2.9. He's approaching Mach 3. Now he's about a mile away and still 1,000 or so feet below this object. Now, it wasn't round. It wasn't smooth. It had edges to it, but he was tempted to open up his visor because he was getting glints off the instruments in the cockpit. And he was trying to see if he could see the shape by blocking out the stars. But he didn't want to risk opening up his visor. So when he was about a mile away and a couple thousand feet below, this object took off. And on about a 30-degree angle of attack, he said he lost it probably going through between 180 and 200,000 feet. So this is 72, 73. Fast forward to 1979. He retires as lieutenant colonel. He has the equivalent of a Q clearance. He applies for a job. He wasn't sure what it was going to be, but he became the facility manager at Area 51.
Oh, wow.
That's how I got into the conversation. Do you believe in UFOs? Because he was just telling me about being the facility manager at Area 51. And he said, I was responsible for absolutely every single structure from the paint locker to the big hangar 18, the one with the peaked roof, to the south of the main base. And he said, I was there he was there a total of 5 years. And the first year, he didn't say a word to anybody, because you start asking questions, your butt's going to be gone. They're going to pull your clearance. You're not going to be charged with anything, but with no clearance, you're SOL. And so after about a year, he's talking to some guys who've been there forever, and they said, have we ever flight tested something here that could leave a blackbird in the dust? And someone has said, I don't know what you've been smoking, but it sounds like it's pretty good. And so the answer to that was no. So I asked him, I said, what about the underground facilities? He said, the ability to drill or create a underground facility in and near Area 51 is a given. On the other side of the Papoose Range is the Nevada test site. And they have the ability to drill and cut through solid granite at a foot an hour on a 36-foot diameter cut.
Wow.
So that ability exists. He said, but one of the problems when you excavate an underground facility like they did with Yucca Flats, they use that same technology to do that. He said, you have to put the debris somewhere. So there has to be a road going in and out of what would be S4. And it would be, and you would have to have an area somewhere in the Nevada test site where they've dumped an awful lot of dirt and rock. And he said, even, you look at your Google shots of Area 51, which are fairly good resolution. And there really is no way to figure out if and when there was an underground facility. Now, Dave did say he did see boxes marked with different designations. They would come into Area 51 on a C5 or a C-130 or C-17 and unloaded with various destinations there at that part of the Nevada test site. And he does vaguely recall seeing stuff that was designated for S4, but he said, I don't have any way to prove it. It just sort of stuck in the back of his head. But he did say, because he knew Bob at the time, he knew Bob Lazar was a friend of mine. And he said he did ask some of his friends that were still there, did you ever fly in a Janet flight from McCarran into the test site with a guy named Lazar? And a number of people that he had talked to says, yeah, I sort of remember the name and the guy. So is Bob Lazar real? Absolutely, positively. I bet my life on it.
Well, I know he's real too, because, that's one thing John Lear, explained on the show, how he met him. Originally, on a weekend, they wanted to get some film of what was going on at Area 51 developed. And at that time, there was photomats, but they were closed. And one of his friends said, well, I know a guy that has a C41 processor in his basement. And
that was me. I mean, you're referring to the day I met Bob Lazar.
Yeah.
And the way I met him, they had just announced the existence of two stealth programs, the B-2 and the F-117. It was November 1988. I think the B-2 was released on the 11th, and the F-117 was announced on the 22nd. And so I was heading into Las Vegas in the first week of January on some business. So I called up Lear and I said, hey, I'm coming into town. Let's see if we can find us an F-117. So it sounds like good to me. So I landed McCarran, rented a car, drove up to Lear's house on Hollywood Boulevard, loaded up, and off we went. We're going up US 95. And we're just past Scotty's Junction. And Scotty's Junction is sort of a point that everybody knows, because it was a legal house of prostitution that was taken over by the feds because of not paying taxes, and they ran it out of business. So, but we're about 15 miles north of Scotty's Junction, and an F-117 flies across the road. He's at about 1,500 feet above ground level, and it cutting across the road at about a 45-degree angle. I almost crashed the car.
Yeah, I would have.
And we got into Tonopah. We grabbed a quick bite. Now, again, this is before digital cameras. And we headed out east on US 6. And you go about 14 miles, and there's a big, huge blue and white sign that says Tonopah Test Range. There's a B-41 nuke weapon with a Nike Ajax booster behind it. So it's 18 miles from the highway down to the main gate of Tonopah Test Range. And as a reservist, I could get on any base unless it's a restricted base like Tonopah or Area 51. But we decided to drive down the fence line. So we go about 2 miles down the fence line, and you can see the whole base. And you can do it today, by the way. Anybody who wants to see Tonopah Test Range could do it today. So we look to the north, and I see a fuzzy black ball with a little white light underneath it, and a bluish white dot with a little white dot underneath it. And I figured that's the F-117 in a photo chase. Now I had a Nikon camera. I had a Nikon 70 to 200 millimeter lens, and I'm shooting Kodacolor 100. Normally I shot Kodachrome, but I needed to have this thing processed pretty fast. So I loaded up 36 exposures, and as the F-117 starts filling up my viewfinder, my body starts vibrating. I'm like a 10-year-old boy that's seen a naked woman for the first time. I could not stop vibrating, not shaking, it was about a 60-second hum to me. And as I'm shooting away, and as soon as it went by me, and I'm out of film, I said, Lear, let's get the hell out of here. Let's get back to Vegas so we can get to a photo mat. So we jump in the car, we head on out, we blasting out. We know we're not going to get to Vegas in time to go to a photo mat. So I'm thinking to myself, I got to wait another day or two before I can get see if I have any film worthwhile. It probably was all blurred. So we stopped at Little Lelia, and we had a bite to eat with Joe and Pat Travis. And then we started heading home, to John's place. And John says, well, I got a new friend. He just moved here from Albuquerque. I think you'll enjoy him. He's interviewing for a job out in the desert. He hasn't gotten it yet, but he's interviewing for a job. And so we get to John's house about 9:15 p.m. that night. And we're there about 10 minutes, and a knock on the front door, and Lear goes answer the door, and in comes this very nice-looking young man, introduces himself as Bob Lazar. So I told him my dilemma. I had, we chit-chatted a bit, and I said, hey, I have a dilemma. I shot the F-117, but I have print film, and I gotta wait until tomorrow to go to a photo mat. And that's when he said, well, I have a C41 processor at home. Let's go to my place. So we jump in his car, and we're not more than a block from Lear's house. And Lazar looks at me. He says, I feel sorry for that son of a bitch, Lear. I said, why is that? I said, the guy is from a world famous aviation family. And my God, if his dad brought Learjet to the world, and the jackass believes in UFOs, how stupid is that? He says, I'm a physicist. If I can't prove it mathematically or put my hands on it, it doesn't exist. So that thing really stuck to me, especially as things about Lazar move forward. So last May of last year, I was at Bob's place up in Southern Oregon. I said, do you remember what you told me the first day we ever met about your belief in UFOs? He said, me like I didn't believe in them and you couldn't put a gun to my head? I said, yeah, that one. He says, yeah, I remember saying that. Bob has a photographic memory.
Well, hey, Stan, we're out of time.
Oh, sure.
You know what? I would like to get you back on here in the next couple of weeks if you would be willing to.
It's fine with me.
Well,
yeah,
then,
I'd be happy. I'd be happy to do that.
I'll have JC make that arrangement. We can continue on. We got like 1 minute. Anything you want to say about Art Bell, real quick?
He was a man with a mission. I mean, to have his world revolve around Pahrump, Nevada, whose claim to fame was Night Dreams, not Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell, and a legal house of prostitution. That's all Pahrump was known for.
Oh yeah,
and he was a man that was here at the right time with the right message, and his slot has been taken over by George Norrie, and I know George Knapp has filled in a lot.
Yeah, but they're not the same as Art Bell.
No
one will ever be another Art Bell,
and no one will ever be like a John Lear. Those were one-offs. They came here as a bright shining light. They burned bright until they were gone, and there isn't anybody following their footsteps that can or could fill their shoes. Let's put it this way: there's people who try to follow their footsteps, but it was a fun time. It was a time of adventure. I mean, I've been to the fence line at Area 51 or Tonopah Test Range 80 plus times.
Oh, when we get you back on, I know a little bit more than what you're saying because John Lear told me what you guys did. So we're going to save that for when we come back on. Hey, James, right. I want you to have a great weekend and, stay out of trouble. And, again, I want to thank you so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Gary, you have a wonderful evening and enjoy the rest of your guests.
Okay, my friend. You take care.
All right. Take care. Adios.
Okay, we're going to be back, so don't go anywhere. We'll be back here in just a couple.
Swam across, I jumped across for you. Oh, what a thing to do. 'Cause you were all yellow. I drew a line for you. Oh, what a thing to do.
Now, the latest news from the Night Dreams Talk Radio Network Newsroom. I'm Guy Ticker.
we need to report UAPs without fear. Have you seen a UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena, or the more popular phrase, a UFO? Did you tell anybody or stay silent for fear of ridicule or harassment? One of the top advocates in Congress for learning more about what people have seen wants to make sure the government takes those reports more seriously than it has. Wisconsin Republican Congressman Glenn Grothman said, quote, "Isn't it important that the Department of Defense look into this and see exactly if there's any possible explanation?" Close quote. I'm Guy Ticker. The news is brought to you by Night Dreams Talk Radio Network. To submit a story or to get all the latest news, go to nightdreamstalkradio.com.
What I enjoy doing a show like this is we can all explore the strange, the unexplained, one dream at a time together as a night dreamer. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. And we are right back. JC, again, would Area 51, if you think about what John Lear did with that car, could you imagine he goes into, I don't remember if it was Hertz Rent-A-Car or the other one, but could you imagine the nerve it would take somebody to go and say, I want to rent this car. And they picks the biggest car you can get, what they had, and drives it down by Area 51. And then his friend has a helicopter. They got a 50 caliber machine gun. They put the machine gun on the helicopter. They nail it up from the air, nail it on the ground. Could you imagine how much nerve it would take to go rent that? Because, I mean, anytime I ever rented a car, they got their clipboard. And they always, they look the car over good because they're hoping that, oh, you brought a car back with a scratch. Could you imagine, he rented the car, took it down there. They had their barbecue, beer going on and all this other stuff. And who knows, maybe some prostitutes running around. I don't know. Could you imagine what they did to that poor car?
Yeah, and then he probably had the nerve not even to top off the gas tank because
what gas tank? I'm surprised they didn't have a blowjob with that car blowing up.
Oh, the biggest one in the world, right?
I think that was really. I don't know. I wouldn't have the balls to do that.
Oh boy, yeah, I could just.
I'm sorry, we're on radio. I gotta take that back. I don't have the testicles that size to do it.
I know, no, and the car had no tank to put any gas in. It's probably in a few pieces, I would imagine. But because listen, those guns are called tank busters for a reason. So you can imagine what it's going to do to a car.
Well, you can imagine the car would look like Swiss cheese, maybe even worse. And the tires were all flat. It was all full of holes. The glass was blowing out, and they had to bring it on a flatbed back to the rental agency. How can you walk in there and say, well, I'm returning the car. Okay, let me get my clipboard. Okay, I'm going to nail this guy for a scratch by the bumper. Right, I'm going to get this guy. He didn't fill up the gas tank.
Yeah.
I could imagine the guy shitting himself.
Oh, yeah.
Could you imagine if you were the guy who rented it out? That was probably your last day working there. You know that.
Yeah. And of course, if you're the one that rented it out, you'd be like, listen, somebody stole it. I parked it over here in this neighborhood. I come back, and this is what I get. You should have told me.
No. That's what happens when you park it on the bad side of Las Vegas.
Yeah, right.
Can you imagine that?
Oh, can you imagine the phone call? Because you got to call somebody to bring a flatbed or a dump truck to bring it back.
Oh, they probably had that all arranged.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not going to take a 50 caliber machine gun to a rental car and blow it all up, right? Without figuring out how you got to return it. Otherwise, you're going to over the car. Hopefully they took insurance. I don't even know. I just don't even know how that could have passed. But, evidently it is a true story. That's what I wanted to verify tonight. But, John Lear did some very interesting things. And again, I just want to stress, if it wasn't for John Lear, we wouldn't have Art Bell doing, UFOs and Bigfoot and Earth changes and all that. So we got to thank John Lear for that. I mean, He was out there. You know, we had a love-hate relationship, me and John Lear. He didn't like me for years. I don't know why. He refused to come on my show. He said he would come on, and then all of a sudden maybe it was one of his, when he was taking his pills, he sent me the nastiest email saying where I could go. And it is not where the sun can set, because it's even deeper than that. And then, when we had him on the first time, we became buddies.
Yeah, I'll tell you the other amazing thing about him too. He was qualified qualified to, I think, pilot 62 different military aircraft.
Aircraft, jets.
Yeah,
62.
that's mind-boggling.
Yeah, that holds the record, actually.
That is mind-boggling, because they're so different, and some of them are pretty much built around the pilot. That is so mind-boggling to be able to qualify for 62 different. I mean, 20 different is pretty good feat, but 62, that's above and beyond.
I'm just wondering, all those missions he flew for the CIA on those craft, what he was hauling.
Well, yeah.
It wasn't bananas.
No,
it might have been coconuts.
These people who's going out in the desert finding pieces of metal, and they're thinking, hey, maybe this is part of that metal or some UFO from crashes. I'm wondering how much of it is part of that rental car.
Yeah. Well, that's a UFO. No, it's actually off that rental car. Yes, yeah. Could you imagine the holes? They start out this big, and they're big, 50 caliber. They're big. They're huge coming out. That car would have been totally gone. Well, we have our next guest was a big fan of Art Bell. He was never on Art Bell's show, but I think he probably listened to every Art Bell show. And he's really noted for everything from UFOs to Bigfoot. So let's find out a little bit of information about our guest.
Stan Gordon was trained as an electronics technician who specialized in radio communications. He worked in the advanced consumer electronics sales field for over 40 years. Stan has been researching UFO sightings, Bigfoot encounters, and other mysterious events in Pennsylvania since 1959. Since then, he's been involved with the investigation of thousands of unusual incidents. For many years, Stan led teams of scientists, engineers, and research specialists to investigate mysterious occurrences across Pennsylvania. He is the primary investigator of the 1965 UFO crash incident that occurred near Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. Stan has been taking calls on UFO sightings and other strange reports from the public since 1969. And he continues to receive unusual reports on a regular basis. He's given illustrated lectures, both locally and nationally, on the topics of UFOs, Bigfoot, cryptids, and strange encounters since the late 1960s. Stan Gordon is a former PA State Director for the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, and was its first recipient in 1987 of the MUFON Meritorious Achievement in a UFO Investigation Award. He was listed in the 2005 Fate magazine special, The 100 Most Influential People in UFOlogy Today. He is the producer of the award-winning UFO video documentary, Kecksburg, The Untold Story. Stan is the author of 4 books: Silent Invasion, The Pennsylvania UFO Bigfoot Casebook, Really Mysterious Pennsylvania, and Astonishing Encounters, Pennsylvania's Unknown Creatures. Stan's 4th book, Creepy Cryptids and Strange UFO Encounters of Pennsylvania, was released on March 2nd, 2022. Stan appears frequently on radio and television programs discussing his research on these topics. He's been interviewed for TV and radio programs nationally and internationally. Stan has been seen on the History and Discovery Channel, SyFy Channel, Fox News Channel, Destination America Channel, and Unsolved Mysteries, as well as numerous other TV programs. Moreover, he was a guest on the Coast to Coast radio show several times.
Well, how are you doing tonight? Do we have you there? Okay, there we go. So, were you actually on Art Bell's show or the shows afterwards?
I was on shows afterwards, but I listened to him for many, many, many years. I was also involved in radio as a hobbyist. I was building crystal radios back in the 1950s, and always had some good radios to listen to the shows, tuning across the AM radio band at night and hearing his distinct voice that always grabbed my attention. So I was listening to him for many, many years.
I remember those crystal radios. My dad was an electronic engineer, and, I got my amateur license, which I let lapse and never renewed when I was 12. But, I when you really think about, crystal radios, winding the coil and making it and getting the crystal and then hooking it up to like a chain link fence and hearing all these radio stations with no battery, that was a big thing when you were a little kid. You know that.
Oh, yeah. Well, it really got me involved and interested in it, and I always enjoyed listening to Art's show. Of course, here in my time zone, it's early morning hours, but I was quite often able to make time to listen in, and it was a great thing. And, he was such an important voice because he was that voice in the night that he was making listeners aware that there were so many strange, unusual occurrences taking place around the country, around the world. But what he did, he brought a lot of serious attention to those controversial subjects, and he encouraged many people also to come forward to discuss their personal experiences. So actually, he helped to overcome, I think, some of the ridicule associated with these topics, and he gave it more credibility.
Well, I think he gave it a lot of credibility because if you go back, I've been in broadcasting going on 55 years. Going back years ago, if people talked about UFOs, you looked at them like they were really strange. Now, if somebody talks about UFOs, they say, well, what did you see? What did it look like? How big was it? It's totally changed. And again, like with Bigfoot, because, in the early 2000s, I had an encounter of a Bigfoot. I kept my mouth shut to about 4 or 5 years ago because the same thing, you tell somebody, hey, I saw a Bigfoot. If I would have said it back in the early 2000s with my friend who was a medical doctor, and he was opening up a practice at that time, he was scared that the word would get out and he wouldn't have a medical practice. Things have changed a lot.
Oh, yeah. Well, they have definitely. I've been doing this now. This year marks 65 years of research. I've interviewed thousands of witnesses, hundreds of Bigfoot witnesses here in Pennsylvania, and a lot of other strange cryptid reports. And I've never personally seen a Bigfoot or UFO myself, but I do a lot of events. I was at an event last weekend, which is right along the border of the one side of the Chestnut Ridge, which is probably one of the most active areas in the country for ongoing yearly UFO Bigfoot cryptid encounters. And many, many people came up to me from that area who told me for the first time, they said, I never shared this with anybody except my family, but talking about Bigfoot sightings, creature reports, UFOs, all through that area. One guy was a hunter for years and years and told me about a very detailed daylight encounter he had with a Bigfoot on the ridge. But these are the things that are going on out there for years, and even the last few years, including this year, is very, very active. A lot of sightings are going on. This past July, was very busy with some amazing low-level UFO incidents, some cryptid encounters. But what's really intriguing now, Gary, is that in the last 2 years, we're definitely seeing an increase in activity. We're seeing more and more detailed, many daylight reports with Bigfoot and UFOs, low-level reports of UFOs, and this is what we're seeing even in recent weeks.
Well, I got to ask you a question, Stan. Could the UFOs and Bigfoot be tied together somehow?
Well, you may recall, we've done a number of shows together, and I'm sure we got into some of this. It's very, very detailed, but yeah, I realized this back in the early 70s. 1973, here in Pennsylvania, we had the biggest UFO outbreak in history with hundreds of sightings being reported throughout 1973. And then in the summer of 73, we had the biggest Bigfoot outbreak ever documented that went into 1974. So you've got to remember, in 1973, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have internet like today. And a lot of people would initially call the police departments or the news media to report what they were reporting. They had nowhere else to call. Well, a lot of those people were also calling my hotline that was started in 1969. But luckily, in 1970, I founded the first of my volunteer research groups, and we had a lot of scientists and specialists involved, and we were lucky we were already set up for 1973. And we were getting a lot of referrals on sightings from the law enforcement, from news media across the state. My teams would be out there day and night, sometimes within minutes, hours, on the scene of these Bigfoot and UFO sightings. And I was out in the field since the 60s investigating Bigfoot in Pennsylvania. At that point, I was convinced that Bigfoot was some type of unknown primate. So 73 comes around, and a lot of strange things start turning up. One of the first things was the fact that this is going on all year round, including wintertime. We'd get on the scene, there'd be this trail of large footprints, big strides, that would go to a distance and then suddenly just abruptly end when there should have been more tracks. And then we began to have this pattern of a UFO sighting in a particular area. Within minutes, hours, or days later, you would have a Bigfoot sighting or vice versa. And then you might recall, we talked about some of these amazing cases where we had a UFO and Bigfoot seen together at the same time and place. And if you want, I can tell you some details on a couple of these cases, but these incidents are ongoing more and more in recent years. I found out a lot more things about Bigfoot, and as strange as it sounds, but there's a lot of data now showing up not only in Pennsylvania but around the country that we're dealing with something that is not a normal flesh and blood creature. As reluctant as I am to say it, for lack of a better term, we're dealing with something that has a physical and a non-physical component to it, and for lack of a better term, we'll say it's interdimensional right now. That's why there's no bodies.
Well, that makes, sense, because when Michio Kaku was on the show back here about 2.5 years ago, he was talking about we were very close, just a few years away from cracking the fifth dimension. And he said if fifth dimension, parallel universes, portals, and all that could exist in it. So maybe whatever they are, they have that capability to go from that dimension into our dimension and back.
Yeah, well, this is so much more involved than people realize. Over the years now, again, I've investigated many type of unusual cryptid creature sightings in Pennsylvania. Some very recently, in recent weeks, are getting reports, a lot in the last few years. And these are coming from all over the state. And these people have no way of knowing about most of these other incidents that are going on. And it's just amazing what's happening. But I have learned a lot about the Bigfoot phenomena, and it is so strange what we're dealing with. I'll tell you, it's well beyond our present scientific understanding. I don't think anybody understands it, including the government. I'm sure they're quite aware of it. But there's both, again, a physical and non-physical component to it. The pattern I found years ago, and still ongoing, is that many close-range, low-level UFO encounters and many encounters with Bigfoot and other cryptids often occur in the vicinity of energy sources. So you have many sightings around power plants, high-tension power lines, railroad tracks, gas wells, gas lines, radio, cell phone, communication towers, bodies of water, etc.
That's very interesting because it does make a sense because, through the years, I've talked to a lot of people who claimed that their sightings of a UFO was near high tension, out in the woods, for example, up mountains, where there's high tension power, lines coming, the towers. And that's where they have seen these type of craft or Bigfoot reported in that area.
But I can also tell you now, in more recent years, we're receiving more and more reports in more populated areas where there's not a lot of woods, even with Bigfoot encounters. And I talk to individuals who have seen these things at very, very close range, not like you see on some of the TV shows in the darkness, see a shadow. We have many, many incidents, even in recent years, of these things being seen in daylight. Up in the Chestnut Ridge and other areas in the last couple of years, many of the Bigfoot sightings are within 40, 50 feet of people. We had an incident, I guess, a little over 2 years ago up in the Indiana County side. Early morning hours, people live deep in the woods. There have been Bigfoot sightings for years around this general area. Ladies out in their property. She sees this 8.5 to 9 foot tall gray-haired Bigfoot walking up out of the woods carrying a deer over its shoulder. It stops when it sees her, leaves out a loud grunt, then runs off through the field into the woods. And there have been many, many other incidents, again, in recent years, many in the last 2 years. But there's many different aspects to Bigfoot. For example, a lot of people have told me over the years they're riding down the road and suddenly this huge 7, 8 foot tall hair-covered creature appears in the center of the road. So it's not coming from the side of the road, it's suddenly appearing. They're seeing it from head to toe, it goes a short distance, and it disappears. And then in other cases, sometimes the body is partly physically solid, other times the body's kind of misty or out of focus. And people say it's like watching a sci-fi movie. They can't believe what they're seeing. But there's a lot more to it than that. I have incidents where there's electromagnetic interference. Interestingly, something you don't hear about very often, but there's reports around the country, and they're rare. But, if you recall, Gary, going back probably to the 50s, you had a lot of UFO incidents where these objects would be hovering near vehicles, and when the objects were close by, the motors would begin to sputter, the headlights would dim, the object would move off, and the power would come back on. We've had the same thing with some Bigfoot incidents where there's a Bigfoot walks out near a vehicle, and suddenly the motor begins to go out, the creature walks off, and the power comes back on. That's just an example.
That's what, I'm puzzled because I'll be honest with you. When I had my encounter, it really messed me up. It still messes me up. I have nightmares, honestly, to this day, quite often about my encounter. I grew up, I don't know if you remember, my father would take me and my brother all over, like around Mount Rainier, Idaho, Montana. We'd go camping, not in a campground, but we'd hike off, like 5, 6, 8 miles out in the, on a mountain or a side of a mountain or out in a meadow somewhere. And I grew up that way. And after, I was stupid because I never believed in Bigfoot. I had so many people for the years at that time call up on my shows. Well, I saw a Bigfoot. I honestly thought they were hoaxsters, or they, I didn't put anything credible to it. And then when I had my encounter, it really messed me up. And it was physical. Now, I don't know if it could have gone interdimensional. I don't know. But my encounter, it was physical. It damaged my wife's new car at the time. And it could have killed us if it wanted to. But I'll tell you, it was an encounter within 20, 25 feet at the end of the encounter with the creature. And I'm telling you, whatever it was, they're scary.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's scary to a lot of people. And again, you've talked to so many witnesses from so many backgrounds. I interview a lot of hunters and outdoorsmen. I interview first responders that call in, people from all walks of life. The majority of these people who call in, whether it's a UFO sighting, a Bigfoot encounter, cryptid, most of these people would never believe it until they had their own experience. For many of these people, it's been a life-changing event. Some of these witnesses I'm still in touch with from 20, 30, 40 years ago. And we could talk for hours about some of the really interesting patterns I've been finding. But I want to tell you, Gary, about what's been increasing, and I think this is one of the most significant part of the UFO UAP mystery that a lot of people aren't talking about. You're beginning to hear more discussion about it, but I think this is very, very important. And these are what I've called mini UFOs for years. I knew about them in the 1960s. Over the years, reports are increasing. In 2022, we had the biggest surge of these cases all across Pennsylvania. We've had reports in recent weeks and months. They're ongoing more and more. But again, you'll hear a lot of people referring to these now as small balls of light or orbs of light below the ground. And these are really intriguing because, one, they're not high in the sky. They're low to the ground. I've had reports for years of these things pacing vehicles. I've had them enter people's homes and cars through open windows. I've had them go right through the walls of the house. I've had them kind of knocking on people's windows by their house and then taking off when they're seen. And in 2022, when we had this big surge, let me give you a couple quick examples. October of 2022, up in Fayette County, which is an extremely active area for all kind of anomalies, especially along the Chestnut Ridge, 6 a.m. in the morning, one of my research associates, Jim Brown's investigated it. Man was in his robe and slippers, was cold. His wife found him sound asleep on the porch, which he would never do. When she finally was able to awaken him, he told her that he was going out to get the newspaper just been delivered. As he was walking out there, this small sphere, about a foot in diameter, like a white sphere, hovering at eye level, he got very close to it, and he said, I got so tired all of a sudden, I couldn't stay awake, and I fell asleep. So 3 days later, about 40 miles away, this is outside of Ligonier, so you got the Chestnut Ridge and the Laurel Ridge area, which is also very active. 2:30 in the morning, this woman's awakened to go to the restroom. She comes out of the restroom, and 5 feet away in her living room, it says about a 1.5 foot diameter, dark blue sphere with a dark mass moving around inside of it. She said it looked like an old lava lamp, the way the motion was. She said she remembered taking one step towards it. She felt like a slight electrical jolt, and then she said, I got so tired, I went right to bed, which she said I would not normally do at all because I'm an insomniac. She said the next day she felt very weak and very sickly. So he had 2 similar accounts with physiological effects within 3 days of each other. That's just an example of what's been going on.
Well, do you have a couple more examples?
Oh, my gosh. Well, I first knew about this UFO Bigfoot connection, and even with the spheres of light, so going back to 1973, when all these strange reports are coming in, and some of these just intriguing, amazing reports. One report was September of 73, north of Pittsburgh. 2 young women were waiting for a friend to pick them up. They see this 7-8 foot tall, hairy Bigfoot with white hair running across the road, but in one of his hands it's carrying a glowing small ball of light. It keeps running towards the woods, and a short time later, this object came across the sky and projected a beam of light down into the woods where the creature ran into. But here's the thing that's intriguing. In more recent years, across Pennsylvania, in areas that have a history of Bigfoot activity, and now this is being reported all over the country, witnesses and researchers are seeing these small spheres of light coming down low over the trees that concentrate on. Some paranormal phenomena, and there's one area now here in Pennsylvania that the last few years that the Pennsylvania Bigfoot Society and some other researchers with them were investigating some Bigfoot activity, and they came across this area, and it apparently has a lot of history of weird phenomena, but they're having everything, even recent weeks, everything from the orbs of light coming below the ground, all kind of strange sounds, cryptid activity. They're seeing all kind of strange things up there. So this is very intriguing what's happening, and it's going on more and more from what I'm hearing from around the country now as well.
When you think about that, it's scary. Has any hunters or people have vanished around any of these reports, gone missing?
No, I'm aware of what you're talking about. That is not common in Pennsylvania. I mean, I hear a lot of reports. I have a lot of contacts in different places. I'm not hearing that type of thing. Have I investigated missing time cases? Yes. I was probably one of the first in the country back in the 60s investigating alleged abduction cases. And all those people came back, however. But in some cases, and again, this is a long detailed thing we could get into and talk about, but I found a couple very interesting patterns. Interviewing multitudes of witnesses, and while anybody can have a Bigfoot or UFO sighting, there are certain individuals out there that seem to have a long history of this. In fact, I've traced it back to the fact that it goes back through generations of some families. There's one person in particular that I've been in touch with for probably well over 40 years. She was a little girl at the time here in western Pennsylvania that was missing. They had a big search ongoing for her, and they found her standing in the middle of the field where she said she had been the whole time, and they had searched there and she wasn't there. And from that time on, she's had a long history of when she was very young, paranormal experiences, apparitions, ghostly type experiences. Later in life, she began to have UFO sightings, encounters with Bigfoot. Sometimes other people were with her. Then later on in life, her children began to experience these things, now her grandchildren. And I've talked to multitudes of witnesses now who tell me very, very similar accounts. In fact, I've talked to some of these people, and they don't even know each other, and yet their accounts are so similar that you would think they were part of the same family. And there's a lot more to this. It's so very, very strange.
It is, Stan. When you think about it, has any of them ever also claimed to have been abducted by ET? Because, again, maybe this whole thing could be tied into each other.
I've interviewed hundreds of witnesses, but we're talking about this particular area. There are some that think that may have happened. All they know is something is missing. They have missing time, and over the years, they've had some very strange encounters. Some of the details are somewhat similar to what some of the alleged abductees have told me and others about. But again, I think we're doing something that's so beyond our present understanding. There's patterns to it, but at other times it makes no sense at all. Like, why do these things even happen? And I'm finding similarities between not only Bigfoot, but also with some of the other cryptid reports as well. And, it's the case that happened back in 1974 during this massive outbreak. I'll tell you very, very briefly about it. It was February 6, 1974, way up in the mountains of southwest Pennsylvania. A woman lived deep in the mountains in a little cabin home, lived there for years, normal life, nothing unusual going on. She was sitting there watching TV that evening when she heard this commotion on a little front porch of her cabin home. She had some empty soda cans out there, and somebody was moving the soda cans around. She didn't think much of it because a few weeks before, she had a pack of wild dogs coming through. So she thought, you know what, I'll just grab my shotgun, my 16-gauge double-barrel shotgun. I'll load one chamber, I'll fire over her head, and I'll scare the dogs away. So she proceeds to load her shotgun. She walks up to the front, hits the switch to turn on the outside porch light. She steps out. There's no dogs there. 6 feet in front of her is a 7-foot-tall, gray-haired Bigfoot. As soon as she put the light on, it put his arm straight up over its head. How does she respond? She pulls the trigger. Wow. She said there's this bright flash of light, like the strobe on the camera, and that huge, hairy creature vanishes. But there's more to the story. Her in-laws lived 100 feet away. They heard the gunshot. Her son-in-law grabs his sidearm, starts walking down the dark road. At some point, he reportedly encountered 4 or 5 hairy people with eyes like coals of fire, and there's this large luminous object covering over the woods at the same time. That's when they called the state police for help. And again, to make the story short, several investigators went up to the scene that night. I talked to the primary investigator. This was during the time there was a big national trucker strike and there was gas rationing. You might recall that. I couldn't get gas to get up there until the next morning with my team. But anyhow, I talked to the primary investigator, and he said when he got on scene, it took him quite a long time to find the place way in the mountains. He said the witnesses were visibly shaken. They gave detailed accounts, but he said what convinced him was the animal reactions. Now, I told you, Gary, I've never seen a UFO or Bigfoot, but I've seen the animal reactions many times. And they had several very big dogs and other animals on that property. The dogs wouldn't bark. They wouldn't move. They were shaking, cowering. And that's what convinced him something very strange happened up there. When I got on the scene early the next morning, all the dogs were barking again. That was one of the cases that convinced me that we're dealing with something with a physical and a non-physical aspect to it.
Well, something is going up, and, when you think about it, something's going on. There's also been a connection with owls, with sightings of UFOs and ETs. Have you had any of that type of sightings?
Yep, I'm telling you, this gets stranger and stranger, and we're hearing all kinds of things. But years ago in the 70s, we knew about certain alleged vocalizations these creatures could make. And also, some was like a woman in pain screaming, a baby crying, a high-pitched whistle, like somebody with asthma, heavy breathing. But we also learned they could mimic any sound, including human. But in more recent years, people were telling us about hearing this ungodly, very loud, vocalized sound like a huge owl. And I remember a fellow a couple years ago who had a Bigfoot sighting was watching this huge Bigfoot, but it was making a sound, he said, like a very loud owl.
Yeah, that's interesting, too, because, again, I had a person on, I can't think of his name. I don't know, JC, if you remember, that he was a game warden, where he actually saw ETs come in from where he was living out in the rural, come walking down his gravel road and walked right into his bedroom and took him. And then after that, he started seeing owls everywhere, and he connected those owls with ETs, somehow shape-shifting or somehow converting where you look at an ET, you don't see an ET, you see an owl.
Yeah, and we've heard these stories for years. There are similarities I'm finding in other cryptid cases or out-of-place animals. So, for example, in Pennsylvania, we of course have a lot of mountain lion reports, but officially they've been long gone, but people report them. So that's something we have an explanation for. What's most intriguing are the Black Panther reports.
Yeah.
So we're talking black jaguars or black leopards. They're seeing them over the years, more and more in recent years, daylight, very close, especially in areas where you have a lot of Bigfoot activity as well. But, for example, I just told you that story about the Bigfoot vanishing. Do you have time for me to tell you quickly about the Black Panther similar report?
We got about 5 minutes left, but go ahead.
Okay, so this goes back to February 1983, again, way in the mountains of Pennsylvania. It's a cold morning. This fella's coming home. His car's overheating. He pulls into his driveway, goes in and gets a can of antifreeze. He's out, coming back. He's pouring antifreeze into the car. A few minutes later, he hears this loud growl. Turns around about 20 feet away. Here's this large black house cat sitting there growling at him. Well, he didn't get real excited over it because up there in the mountains, there's cats all over the place. So he goes back to put more antifreeze in the car. A couple of minutes later, he hears a louder growl. He turns around and he said, I couldn't believe what I saw. That big cat has now physically grown to twice its size.
Wow.
So he throws the antifreeze can at it, and it growls at him very loudly. It turns around slowly, starts walking outside, which that whole area is lit up outside. He runs into his house to get his pistol. Said he came out a few minutes later and he said, now I couldn't believe what I was seeing whatsoever. He said, now that big cat has grown to an animal like I saw in the zoo, like a big black leopard, a black panther. It has glowing yellow eyes. It's making this ferocious growling at me. I took a shot at it, he said, and I don't know if I hit it, but moments later, as I'm watching it, it's physically vanished and disappears right in front of me.
That is so interesting. You think we're ever going to be able to figure out what is really going on?
I'll tell you, I said I'm hopeful that someday we would have the answers before, while we're still around, but I don't think it's going to happen. But here's the thing, too, you got to look at, Gary. I have multiple UFO incidents, and of course, some of these like the Tic Tac reports. Many in recent years and this year, even in April this year, 3 low-level daylight, low-level sightings over populated areas. We've got one good picture of them. One's on my website. Other pictures the last few years on my website of these long cylindrical objects with no wings, just hovering and just vanishing in most cases. But there are similarities between some of the low-level UFO sightings I've had where these things are hovering, slowly fade away and vanish, or they physically change from one form into another. And as weird as it sounds, the reports coming in from all over the country of these spheres of light allegedly changing into creatures, Bigfoot changing into creatures. I'm telling you, it is so bizarre what's going on out there. But it's not just 1 or 2 reports. You're getting reports like this all over the country now we're hearing.
Well, I tell you what, it gives you something to scratch your head about. It's intriguing what is going on, between, these reports of UFOs, Bigfoot and dogmen and all these other, things that go bump the night. Hey, Stan, is there anything you want to share to the listeners? We got about a minute.
Well, again, they go to my website, which is stangordon.info, I-N-F-O. There's ways to contact me by way of phone and email through there. And, my books are also available on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. The newest book is Creepy Cryptids and Strange UFO Encounters of Pennsylvania. I go into detail. I have chapters on a lot of these things we did not have time to talk about. There's creature reports that are things you never heard of before. It's just amazing things we're dealing with.
Well, Stan, we need to get you on for an hour straight. Tonight it's been, tribute to Art Bell. But I would love to talk about this for a good hour or so.
Sure, just get a hold of me and we'll schedule something down the road.
Okay, my friend, you have a great weekend. And I want to thank you. You take the time in your busy schedule to come on here tonight.
Well, Gary, thanks very much. It was great tribute to Art Bell, and we miss his this famous voice out there.
We sure do, my friend. You take care, and you have a great weekend, will you?
Thanks, Gary. You too.
Okay. Well, JC, think about all this stuff. What would you do when you've been out there looking for Bigfoot? What would you do if you ran across one?
Well, I that's a good question. thought I have a couple times, but you got to be careful what you wish for. I mean, what would you do? First of all, you don't know what kind of personality or what kind of mood it's going to be.
Well, I could take your car fender out. I can tell you that.
Yeah, and here's the other thing: you better have the same kind of caliber that Mr. John Lear had out in the desert. You may be in trouble.
Well, even a 50 caliber, if these things are interdimensional,
yeah,
it's not going to do you any good. I don't know. I bet the problem is I watch too much sci-fi in the night because I can't, doing the type of shows and research, I'm up to like 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. So as I'm doing the research, I'm watching sci-fi. And I'll tell you what, I would never go in the woods again, ever, because, there's all kind of creepy things out there, that go bump in the night.
Oh, I have said for years, if people really knew what was in the woods, they would think twice before they go in the woods. Even when I was a young, and Gary, I used to go in the woods all the time. Young, hunting and fishing. I would see packs of wild dogs. People drop their dogs off. And what do dogs do? They pack up out in the middle of the woods. They can't handle no more. Next thing you know, you got a pack of dogs, and they turn wild. And I've seen them do things that, I wouldn't want them to do to me.
Well, if they found you and they were hungry, they're going to eat you.
That's right. They pretty much, yeah.
They're going to find body parts all over if they ever do. Could you imagine that? Again, tonight's show, I want to thank all the people that's been on tonight. Major Ed Dames, Whitley Strieber, Jim Goodall, and Stan Gordon. I don't know any other shows that would bring 4 major players into these topics on in one show, and we did that. And again, we are almost at 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. It's like growing every night, every day. And again, I would like to see our, chat go, but again, it's watch and play. In other words, we do the show, it's up there and people watch it at their convenience, which is cool. And we do cover all time zones. And I'll tell you what, we have listeners all over the world. I mean, it's amazing me how many people are emailing me and say that they enjoy the show. Talk radio, Art would be rolling in his grave if he actually saw what and heard what's going on in talk radio. Talk radio has changed. It was informative. It was entertainment. It was fun. And it could be where people would share their thoughts. Now they do it, but it's all kind of too focused on one thing constantly and a lot of hype. And that's not going to happen on this show. Now, people have been saying, well, how many days a week are you going to be on starting in September? I'm going to be on 3 nights, Wednesday to Friday, mainly because I'm an old fart. So I got to spend some time with my wife and family because I've been in broadcasting and commercial for so many years. And doing that, I'll be honest with you, my wife slept at night in that bed by herself, at least I hope, many nights while I was working nights. So, I 3 nights a week, and we're going to have like the best guests we can possibly have for you guys. Now, if you help support the show, you can, for $4.99, whatever, it helps pays the bills. We do bring on, bumper music from the 70s to 90s. And, that's another thing, JC, that has really helped the show a lot, with the news, the bumper music, and the way we interview on the show. Now, you're going to be doing something really special Sunday, right? What are you going to be doing Sunday?
I am going to be at the Gretchen's Fest in East Liverpool, Ohio. That's a big kind of a paracon going on. There'll be people set up with booths, and there will be people speaking. I just got notified I'll be speaking there too. So stop on in between 11 a.m. to 6 or 5 p.m. Pacific or Eastern time.
And you're going to have some stuff for sale on your table too, aren't you?
Oh, of course. I'll have some good stuff, paranormal stuff related to things. So
you got any mirrors?
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't buy a used mirror.
No, sir.
Yeah. Maybe that's why I was cutting myself. My wife found me a used mirror, and she goes, "Here, use this for shaving." And now, since I've been using it, I've been cutting.
Yeah, you're right. Wait till the person inside it looks back at you.
Oh, gee. Especially if it's one of my ex-wives.
Yeah, the first one.
Well, everybody, I want to thank you so much for being here tonight. And again, everybody have a good one. We'll catch you on the other side, I think. So we'll catch you, what? Next? Oh, I almost got out of here without saying, who's our guest next week?
Hey, next week we got Thomas Jane coming back on. You don't want to miss that one. He's always a great guest.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about his career and maybe a little bit about his TV series that's being filmed in Australia. And we're going to be talking with him about UFOs, right?
You better believe it. And it's going to be a good show. Yes, he covers a wide range of topics all in one show.
Make sure you give us a thumbs up and ring that bell if you haven't done that. That's very important because our sponsors look at that. Well, till next Friday, because here's another thing I forgot. Next Friday is our last show for August till we come back in September, 3 nights a week. I'm going to take a couple, week and a half off and do some painting and some maintenance around the property. So I'm going to be doing that. Everybody have a good one. And thank you for tuning in tonight. Tell your friends about us.
You remind me of something I can't find with words. You remind me of what it's like to just